Welcome to Chew the Chat Podcast.
Welcome to Chew the Chat Podcast, John Wedger.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You are somebody that I've followed closely from the first, I think it was more than likely the True Crime podcast with Sean Atwood where I first saw you,
right.
I think. And you've done, I think, 3-4 episodes, something by now.
I've just done my 5th with Sean.
There you go. I think at first, I was lucky enough to come across Sean's True Crime podcast. As it started, I know his YouTube channel is much older with his own story of his life. But the True Crime podcast has been something that's really fascinated me as we talked pre this podcast now. Bounce back stories, people who've got off on the wrong track and managed to get themselves back. So yeah, seeing your story was fascinating because it was one of the first times that I'd seen a policeman. So for people watching and listening now, John Wedger, you did over a quarter of a century in the police force, Scotland Yard, serious crime. You found yourself digging into child prostitution, and then that opened up a whole world of just horror and difficult things that you went after.
A lot of pain.
Yeah, and you didn't get a lot of help going after that stuff.
No.
And as we'll find out today, we'll unravel it all. You campaign across the UK, across Europe. You work with victims. You try and bring the media, the government, you try and bring them into the light of what's happening. So we'll get into it today. Thank you for being with us, John.
That's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And what a lovely venue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Chew the Chat.
The most colourful one we've been on yet. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's lovely. Yeah, lots of my children's artwork and bits and bobs in here and what have you. But listen, talking to children, that's why this podcast means a lot to me, because whether we're going to go to one end of the scale as we are today with you, where we get into the law, we get into the structure, the momentum of things that we don't really learn as the public. For me, growing up just in a divorced world where mum and dad didn't get on and just sort of what is tame in comparison to what we're going to get into today, this podcast is born out of wanting to sort of understand the impact on young people and what that does to the trajectory that then gets set for them and their lives, and for us as a society, as a culture, as a community. You yourself, John, you raised four boys as a single dad, while pursuing this career that you were driven to just excel in as best you could. Take us back to how you entered the police. Now, there is a lot of information out there for you, and I'm going to link in Sean's podcasts. So, but yeah, if you can take us back to how we arrived today.
Yeah, I mean, where I am now is that I campaign and I help. I do outreach work. I'm a lot more low key than I was. I made a huge platform through social media, through Facebook, which I've stepped away for because with Facebook, it's quite a toxic environment, and there's a lot of damaged people out there. And of course, the topic that I'm on about, which is child abuse, it affects so much. I don't think we, as a society, we really fully understand how much it affects us and society in general. It's huge, and if it ever come out how big this was, I think it would shock a lot of people. So this all was born out of my service in the police. Ultimately, my work with child victims of sexual exploitation, prostitution, however you want to term it. I know people get the ump with this term child prostitution because it shows some sort of intent. I'm not going to get caught up in a seminar in semantics. It doesn't matter how it's termed. It is what it is, you know. And any act against a child is an act of evil. And that's where things really went wrong. I never wanted to deal with kids. I ended up as a single parent of 4 kids, very young. I was young. My youngest child was 9 months. They're now grown men. I stayed with them. So I also speak out against single parenting. It's wrong. It seems socially acceptable. It should never be socially acceptable. and I'm qualified to say that. Now, that upsets some people.
Yeah.
Because they sit there and think, oh, as a single parent, I'm doing all right, it's not my fault. I'm not going to get caught up in a blame culture. Whatever adults can do what they want to each other. I don't care. They can stick things up each other. They can go at parties. I'm not interested. But you leave kids alone. And kids are going to pick up on everything. So where there is dysfunctionality, your kids are going to be brought up under this environment of abandonment, rejection, anger, all sorts of things, which are going to have a massive negative impact on themselves and how they then bring up their own children. So if you've got alcoholism, then the kid's got a propensity to go down the same route. I mean, there was a study that came out and it said that children that had been abused at home, bear in mind 80% of all abuse goes on in the home. So we sit down, we blame outside agencies all the time, but hang on, it goes on in the home more than anywhere else. So kids that have come from abuse, they're 6 times more likely to be used for some sort of exploitation or trafficking. So we're setting them up to fail. And our society is allowing that, you know, it's patronising this terrible culture. So I never wanted to work with children because I was bringing up children. And it was the children that found me. And I take the timeline right the way back. I grew up, I was born in London, lived in London, and then moved out, went to school just outside, you know, it was an overspill town. My father was a black cab driver. He lived in London. My mum and my father were sort of separated. Because my father come from an Italian Catholic family, you know, divorce wasn't an option, you know. Right. So they just don't do divorce, and that's that. So they just lived apart, really. My dad was okay. He wasn't a bad man. He was an absent man. And even to this day, I don't say there's not hatred. Hatred's too strong a word, but I had no real respect for him. Yeah. Because he abandoned me, you know. And look at it however you want, you know, he did. And he could have done a lot more. I ended up with, I termed him a stepdad. He wasn't stepdad. He become like my best friend. And he looked after me, this guy. And this guy was, I was about 15, 16 when this fella sort of came into the family life. And this guy was just short of 7 foot, big, strong man. And he was a fighter, you know, in fields. He'd fight in fields, you know. He fought a well-known gypsy, a bloke called Gypsy Johnny Frankham. And he won, and he paid for his, bought his house with the winnings from that. He was a very capable guy. Basically, he lived outside, you know. He used to sleep outside sometimes. You'd find him in a chair outside in the rain asleep. But he was a tough man, and he had a very tough attitude to life. But he was good. He was good to me. You know, he made me work. There was no laying around. I wasn't allowed to. He didn't let me go to nightclubs. Wouldn't let me. He said, no, you're not going there. They're dens of iniquity. And he'd say, come to the pub. And he would drink like he worked, you know. And it was the alcohol, basically, that killed him. Fighting and alcohol killed him in the end. But I thank God for this guy, you know. He was always being arrested. He stood trial 9 times for attempted murder.
On 9 separate occasions? On
9 separate occasions, yeah. So he wasn't a good man. I'm not saying by all means.
What was he like with you, John, as a, you know, as a kid, a young adult, a young man? You know, you're going through a lot of change, 16, 17, yeah. 18. Could you talk to him about more sensitive issues? Would he twig on to things with you in that way?
Yeah, you could do, but there was no niceties, you know. There was no, my mum worked hard. My mum was like a Shire horse. She was born to work. She's now in her late 70s. She still works full-time now. Wow. And where she lives, she does a communal gardening. She cuts the grass, you know what I mean? She's a carer, and she cares for people younger than her. So she was always full on with work, or, you know. And my stepdad, he was just an incredible man. He was just tough. He wasn't really a sensitive man. So if you was having a drink, you could tell him stuff. Mm-hmm. But on the whole, he didn't have any time for it, you know. But he just knew what I needed. And he basically taught me to look after children, you know. He had a terrible, terrible upbringing.
That's an interesting angle though straight away, John, isn't it? Because communication and that feeling, and also I'd like to ask, were you aware then of, you know, because when you are being brought up with hard lines, as you're kind of pointing out, you're talking, you know, now in retrospect, well, you know, this was good for me and this was useful and I understand it. Did you understand it then? No,
and it was painful because I wasn't allowed to lay in. I would, every minute he made me work. So I also went to college in the evening, so I'd do a day's work. I used to cycle to work. I used to swim in my lunch break because I'm obsessed with swimming. I'm not so much the last couple of years, but before that, I've always wanted to swim the channel, you know. But I'm a breaststroker, so it's hard work. You know, I did do 17 miles in 2018 around the Isles of Scilly.
Oh wow!
Yeah, but I got badly stung by jellyfish. But that was all to raise money for drug and alcohol rehab centre.
Okay.
So I worked outside. I got to college, you know. So I learnt to bricklay, plumb, weld. I was obsessed with languages. So when I would ride to work, I used to have like a little Walkman headset, and I'd listen to Arabic, Turkish, Spanish. It was just crazy. I mean, I even become fluent in Lithuanian, and no one really spoke it, and I couldn't speak. Not so much now. I've forgotten a lot of it, but I could, you know. Yeah. And the police actually used me on a couple of occasions for. There was a murder inquiry out in Essex, and I was used for that, you know. So. But I never went to university. I'd have loved to have gone to university to do languages. So I always wanted to do more with my life. I wasn't satisfied with what I had. And I always wanted to eat at other people's table, as it were, you know. I had I have got a high IQ. You know, I'm not being conceited, I have. But, you know, we come from a working class background. It was just my mum's income. She worked in a pub. So we never really had much, but we always worked. I've got a sister who's a twin sister who's a teacher.
A twin sister? I never knew that about you, John.
Yeah, she teaches special needs kids. I've got an older sister who's an artist, portrait artist. But we come from a housing estate, you know. And I didn't know what I wanted with my life, really. And then whatever I wanted to do, I wanted to be able to swim. So I thought I'd become a diver. I'll train up and I'll do diving, and I can go around the world and they can pay for it. So I was working as a telephone engineer for British Telecom, and I went and did a commercial diving course, and then there was an opportunity come up because the Metropolitan Police had a diving unit, and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I didn't really want to, as my sister suggested it, and she introduced me. She had friends that were in the police, so I went and met with one guy and had a chat with him, and he was just telling me, you know, how good it was. But it put me off because I didn't like football, and I used to have to do like football duty and, you know, and stuff like that, and it seemed very confrontational. I'm not a confrontational person. So I thought, well, I'll join the fire brigade then. So I applied to join the fire brigade. But my sister got me the paperwork for the police, so I thought I'll fill both out. So I filled both out, sent them off, and I went away for all their tests and passed everything. And my company offered redundancy, right? So it was really bizarre what happened, because there was I knew an ex-professional boxer who was a gypsy, and he ended up the last years of his life. He become a faith healer, you know, and he was a very well known professional boxer, you know, in the day. And he said to me, "You're going to get a new job." I went, "What are you on about?" He said, "You're going to get a new job, and your job are going to pay you to do this job." I went, "Okay." And he said, "And you're going to go to the top. Whatever you do, you're going to go to the top." And because he was a bit of a fortune teller, and he said, "But you'll leave, and it'll be your choice to leave." And this was years ago. This was when I was about 20.
I'm going to say, John, yeah, this
21.
is the beginning of this police career.
And I took no notice of it. So I went into work and they said there's redundancy coming up. And then a letter comes through from the fire brigade. This was the beginning of the year. And the fire brigade said, look, we want you to start your training and we want you to start in February. And I think it's beginning of February now or end of January. So I said, all right, brilliant. So my work said, look, there's redundancy. I thought, great. So I put in for redundancy and they said, look, if you put in for it, you can't go back, right? So if you put in for it, that's that, you've got to leave. And I went, no, I want it. So they said, right, put your papers in. So I put my papers in. So basically I'd resign now. And I thought, well, that's all right. I don't want to join the police anyway. I didn't really like it. It wasn't really me. And then the police come through and said, look, we'd like to start your training with us in April, beginning of April. And then my work come back and said, redundancy, your last day of work is going to be the 18th of March. And I went, right, can I take some holiday? And I can then join, you know, the fire brigade. I went, no, you go on this day and that's that. And you can't leave because I'm still in employment and all that and start another job.
Obliged, yeah.
Yeah, because you've got the P60 and the P45 and all the taxing. And so I started cursing this guy. I think, this idiot gypsy, what's he on about? It's a load of lies, this fortune-telling nonsense. I'm not interested, you know. And I basically cursed this guy. And then when I went back, you know, the police had offered me a start date of the, I think the 18th of April. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to take that. And they had a diving unit. So I thought, well, I can do that. I can join and then I can get off the streets and I can become a diver with the police and that's it. That's my life sorted. I thought, right, I'll do that then. And I just didn't want to join the police. End of anyway. So I left my work and I started with the Metropolitan Police beginning of the 90s. And I remember turning up there and they pick you up from the tube station in a minibus. And they take you to the training college, Hendon Training College, the biggest and oldest training college for police in the world. Massive place. And went in and I think there was about 100 recruits. And I just didn't fit in. And the instructors came, and it was back then it was classed as discipline service, so it wasn't the army, but it weren't far off that structure, you know, shouting at you, and they had like drill sergeants, right, and these were all ex-guardsmen, and so they become a civilian police role. To teach what they used to teach in the army. So these guys turn up and they're all the same. They're all big with moustaches, you know, and they cut the peak of their cap so it's down, shiny boots and all that. So they turn up, start shouting, and everyone gets splintered off into their classes. And I'd lost my voice. My voice had gone for some reason. And it was really weird because I joined with no voice and I left with a voice. The irony of it all.
Yeah.
The irony. And I can remember one instructor come up to me and for some reason he just didn't like me. And he said, what's your name? So I told him my name. And I couldn't talk. It come out like a squeak. He went, what's the matter with you? And I went, like, my voice. So he got right in my face and he said, listen, you CUNT, if you don't get your voice back, you're out of here tomorrow. And I just thought, what a way.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, you know, and he was chewing gum, like, you know, got his sleeves rolled up and his peak cut. And I was thinking, hard man, I've just spent, you know, the last few years of my life, you know, with my stepdad, who was a hard man. I mean, my stepdad would turn up with a fractured skull one day where he'd been stamped on. He'd, one day he was battered with a bit of wood and his arm was broken. He had all gold teeth where he'd been knocked out and been replaced. He'd had his eye socket broken. Oh, he was every week he was in a fight, and I mean his head was like a road map. There were scars everywhere. He used to do his own stitches, and you know he had no knuckles, where they were all broken. You know, and so he wasn't just mouth. This bloke used to fight. He used to enjoy fighting. I didn't like it. It weren't my thing. It used to upset me when I'd see him in that state, and he'd say, "Why have you done this?" And he just said, "I just like it," and he did. He just liked fighting. I saw him punch a cow once. And,
I shouldn't laugh.
You know, but he did. He punched a cow come running, and I was with him in the field come running, and he was going to put a tag in its ear because he kept cows. And he said, if we run, it'll trample us. and its head went down. He said, it's gonna ram us. And so he chinned it, and it shook its head, and it got another couple in its head, and it decided not to bother, you know. But it crunch, you know, fist hitting this cow's head.
Jesus.
You know, so anyway, I'm in the training college, and I've got this thing shouting at me. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? I don't need to be here. But what saved me was they had a swimming pool. So in my lunch break, I used to go for a swim. But they didn't let recruits swim. So the PTI saw me and knew I was good. And he said, if you can do a mile breaststroke in 25 minutes, which is competitive speed, you can stay, you can come. And I went, okay. So he timed me, and I did. I did it in that time. He went, right, brilliant. He said, you know, we want you to join the swimming club, but 2 lunch breaks every week, you have to do wrestling. You have to join the wrestling club.
Wow.
They had a wrestling club, and no one would join it because it was run by 2 ex-squaddies who were just massive. One was a PTI for P Company, the parachute regiment. He was just a monster. I think he got kicked out because he was brutalising
too
people.
beastly, yeah.
Yeah, and another one, he was just a big lad, and anyone who joined just got thrown about. So anyway, I thought, well, I better do it. And it turned out I was good at it. And I ended up doing a few little, you know, competitions with them. And it ended up really saving my skin, to be honest. The wrestling was a saviour.
I can imagine, because so much scuffling, fighting ends up in a grapple, where you literally got, you know, punches get thrown, but often they're wild. And before you know it, you're in some kind of a grappling situation, and restraint is easy from there. And
if you're seen punching someone, you're in a world of trouble. But if you're seen rolling around, it's not so bad. That's where coppers got in trouble, because they were punching and kicking people, and you see it on the telly, and it's what people get the upset when they see it. So and it was good for me, because I'm very antisocial. I don't like socialising, and I never used to have lunch. It weren't a thing for me. I used to just work, so I could go swimming. It calmed me down, and it made me put up with the training then, because I just didn't like it, and I didn't like the marching. I hated the marching. I was always out of step. So one instructor tried to get me kicked out, and the reason was because I smiled. And he said I was too confident, and I was smiling, and the public wouldn't like it. So he tried to get me backclassed for attitude, because I smiled. I mean, what need it, you know?
Yeah, it's a sign, isn't it?
Yeah, and I found out later that there was allegations of impropriety on this guy with female students. So it's, again, another pattern. People who attack me, there tends to be some sort of perversion going through their lives, you know? So I got through my training, and then I got sent to South East London, a very tough part, and I loved it. I was on the street. I really did well, you know.
What was this? Is this 80s?
No, it was early beginning of the 90s.
So being a bobby on the beat back then, you was, I imagine, I mean, I was a young kid then, but I imagine there's still a bit of actual community feeling happening, and police have got a different kind of a relationship with it.
Yeah, but it was raw as well, because a lot of people I joined with had joined in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
So policing in the 70s was a world apart from what it is now.
Of course.
So those that were training me had come from that environment, and it was, yes, there are good people, but you don't get to meet them. It was so busy, and it was so violent, and crack cocaine and heroin had just really sort of taken London by storm. Crack was just causing destruction everywhere. So it was a brutal part of town. So everything was confrontation, fighting, and, you know, everything ended up in a roll around, and it was just mad. But I started getting information given to me, because people liked me, and I just managed to talk to people.
So that smile that you were kind of ridiculed or reprimanded for actually was part of your just human approach to how you deal with things anyway. Yeah,
and it was, but also what happened when I was in there, that's when I met my missus, who I had the kids with, and she'd come from a crime family. I don't tend to talk about her much because it's not fair on my children, to be honest. I've got nothing good to say about her, but I don't like mud flinging, you know. But she was a dysfunctional woman from a dysfunctional family, and I ended up in a relationship with her and got her pregnant, and you know she already had 2 kids and went on to have 2 more with me. But it all went very, very wrong. It was a very volatile, violent, horrible relationship, and very abusive she was towards the kids, and she was using drugs. She was using Class A drugs, and I initially very naive to it, but later on I was to find out, you know. So I sympathise to anyone who's you know, got a partner that's in that situation, because it only ends in tears, you know, and if it is violent, the only thing to do is to get out, because it don't get any better. So that my career went a little bit wrong from the start, you know, and I ended up, like I say, getting a lot of information given to me. So I realised that there was an ability I had, and I got a lot of recognition for it. The team liked me, but there was a sergeant that I absolutely hated my guts, and that, again, that's because I smiled, you know, and it was because I smiled, and whatever I did, he would berate me. So if I brought a prisoner in and he was a custody sergeant, he'd shout at me in front of him, try and belittle me, did everything he could, and I thought, I've had enough of this. I'm going to leave. I want out. And I thought I could go back to doing what I was doing before, the telecom stuff as a contractor. I don't need this. So I had it in my mind.
How long into your policing career are you at that point, John?
A year.
Is that it? Yes. Yeah, so a year of kind of, and you didn't fit, as you said, on the way in. Then he's on your case.
Yeah.
And,
but the team liked me. People on the streets liked me. I don't want to sound conceited, but they did. But what happened? It was I got in trouble. Right, I got in a world of trouble. Only because I didn't know how the system worked, because no one bothered to teach me. And policing's all about regulations. You know, there's a regulation for everything, and I'd violated these regulations. I was being micromanaged, so they had me on all these different silly things that I'd done. And I was going to go up before a discipline panel, and I thought, oh, they're going to sack me. So I thought I'd given up. I just didn't care. And I can remember once that everyone else would go out in the cars, driving about, and this one guy used to make me walk on my own in a very rough part of London, right? And it made me walk. I forget. I was in Woolwich in southeast London, and I had to walk something like 6 miles from one station to another to relieve him for his coffee break. And on the way there'd been a stabbing, and the lad had been stabbed very bad, and he's on the street, and I was the first one there, and I opened his top, and he's got multiple stab wounds, and I didn't know what to do. And so I thought, oh, flipping hell. So there was all like froth coming out because his lungs were collapsing. So I got some tissue out my pocket, and I started plugging these holes with tissue. It turned out it was the wrong thing to do, but I didn't know. And the ambulance, called the ambulance. I called up for help. There was no one there to help me. And as I'm doing it, I'm getting attacked. So I'm getting punched and kicked. I got kicked in the head, punched and everything while I'm trying to help this lad. So I'm covered in blood, and I'm bruised as well. And then eventually help comes, and the ambulance crew come, and they've gone berserk because there's all this tissue stuck in this poor lad. And from there, I walked back to the station, and I'm covered in blood. You know, and as I walk in, this sergeant's there with another sergeant in the custody and starts shouting at me for being late. And I'd had enough by this time. I really had enough.
Jesus Christ.
And the flying squad had produced a prisoner from, I don't know, from one of the prisons. And he was there clearing up some crime for them. God knows why. And they, anyway, shouting at me. And they said, right, we're going for a coffee break. This man's with the flying squad. He's to go in a cell. He's not to have a cigarette. Back then they could smoke. And the sergeant's left his cigarettes on the table. And he went, and then you're to make me and the other sergeant a cup of coffee. And then they sort of went out. And this bloke said to me, he said, he talks to you like you're a CUNT, didn't he? And I went, yeah. He said, you can make them coffee? I went, yeah, I am. And I saw this packet of cigarettes there. So I said, do you want a cigarette? He went, yeah, I love one. So I took out about 6 or 7 cigarettes and just gave them to him. And I gave him a light. And then I had a cigarette and I boiled the coffee and I made this coffee and this fella's there smoking and I spit in it. And he starts laughing. And then we near watch this. And then I covered one nostril and I snotted in it. And this fella's in stitches by this time. And I went, oh, look. And then it's bad, but I rimmed it with my winkle around the rim of the glove.
For this sergeant?
Yeah, for this sergeant. And this fella, honestly, he couldn't stop laughing. He went, does he want sugar? I went, yeah. He said, can I put it in? I went, of course. So I give him the spoon, and he gets the spoon, and he puts the sugar in, and then he puts the spoon up his bum, and then he stirs the coffee. He does, right? Oh, and then he comes in and he drinks it. And he goes, oh, that's delightful.
Really?
Yeah. And he goes, and what's this man doing, you know? So I said, no, I'll take him now. There's smoke everywhere. He looks in his packet of cigarettes. They're almost all gone. I just had enough of this bloke. I didn't care. Right, they're all like empty and there's smoke all over the place. Anyway, I put the fella in the cell and he grabs hold of me. He said, look, I'm out in 8 years. He owned a big nightclub. He was quite, I think he probably is one of these big gangsters that we hear about. I couldn't remember his name now, but he owned a big nightclub by the Blackwall Tunnel. And he said, when I'm out, he said, I want you to come and I'm going to look after you.
Oh, there you go.
And he said, don't you ever change, son. You know, but I ended up going for this discipline thing, right? And they all give their evidence. These, you know, the sergeant gave his evidence, you know, and shouting and screaming at me and all that. And the senior officers there, one of them, he looked at me and he went, do you know what? He said, when I joined the police, I'd have promoted you for behaviour like that. He said, unfortunately, the times have changed. You know, we're going to give you a chance. Where do you want to go? So I said, can I go to Paddington? Because I'm from Paddington. So he went, okay, you start Paddington Monday morning. Well, Paddington weren't available, so I went to Belgravia.
Okay.
So I went to Belgravia and I got put in the CID. And I'd only had 2 years service, but they thought I had 20 years service. There was a typing mistake.
Really?
So, yeah, so they then said, you're getting this lad from South East London, he's got 20 years.
And you'd had two,
2
and
years.
Begrudgingly two as well.
two horrible years. So they thought, flipping, he knows what he's doing, you know? And I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
So what's that like, day one, going into CID? I mean, did you ring round? Did you have someone you could speak to? Shit, I'm going CID on Monday.
Well, I went to a team, but then they put me, you know, on the CID. And the inspector was a nice bloke. He was an ex-sergeant, an ex-officer from the parachute regiment. And he said, look, you know, you've got a lot of ability. And he said, look, I'm going to get you. You belong in the CID. But what I didn't realise was the CID there was full up of officers under investigation for corruption. So it was all full of flying squad officers, regional crime squad officers, officers from the National Crime Squad, were all put there because there was surveillance on every single telephone.
This is Belgravia.
Belgravia, yeah. So if you read a book called The Untouchables, it's all about police corruption. There's a massive section on Belgravia CID. And I was in amongst that, right? So I then turn up there, and because I've been moved, they think I'm corrupt. So they accept me, you know, and it's a very bizarre culture, you know. So
does do all the officers know that they're in there under that guise then?
The uniforms so much don't, but the CID do, you know. The CID were very, very aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And we had a detective inspector there, right? They called him the Ginger Giant, and he would just bare knuckle fight people. And he had the ump with one of the sergeants, and he punched the sergeant so hard in the eye, his bone from his eye went and damaged his eye, and they had to pencil him off. The guy fell to the floor, and he went, leave him there, no one pick him up. And he ended up being pensioned off through ill health because he's just smashed him in the face.
Jesus.
It was just brutal. You know, one sergeant I had, when we used to go and do the raids on a Friday, if you went in a house, he would be first in, and if there was a man there, he'd go up and headbutt him, just walk up and bang.
Just presence known, here we are.
Yeah, and that because he'd come from the flying squad, and that's how they did it, you know. So it was crazy times, but I never had a problem with it, right? Because it's just how it was. And I never really saw corruption as such. It was going on, but I never got caught up in the stealing money thing or that. You know, again, it was going on, but they never involved me, so I'm not going to involve them. So from there, I moved on to the River Police, and
so you're finding your way back to the water, but not
yeah.
necessarily into it.
Yeah, and by this time I've got left with the children, so I've got all the kids at home. But the River Police had such a brilliant shift pattern, I could spend a lot more time at home.
How did that work then? So just off-piste a little bit, because I'm interested in viewers and listeners of this podcast know that the childhood thing is a big part of a lot of these conversations. We always arrive at this point, and you being in this position, John, a father of four, two kids you've taken on and 2 kids that you've birthed, and you're in the police force with a full-time job, full-time gig, bringing these kids up. How did you navigate that? Did you get help? Did you have like maternal, paternal help?
Yeah, my mum would help, and my twin sister lived nearby. So I was living in East London, so I moved from East London to near where my mum was living. I bought an ex-council house. A big, really, it was actually a lovely house, to be honest, but it was in such a crappy area. But so I moved out of East London, where I thought was quite bad, and I moved out to a town in Hertfordshire, which was horrendous. It was just full of travellers. Right. Again, I'm not knocking them, but it was crazy, you know, and they haven't got the police. The moment you move out of London to provincial towns, it's like the Wild West, you know?
Yeah.
And it was just mad. It was horrible, and I was living in an ex-council house on a council estate, but the school the kids went to was at the back of the house, so the kids could get to school. Luckily, one of my boys, the older ones, I trusted him with. He's such a good kid, so he would always make sure the boys were in school on time. So I was very reliant. So the kids were left home alone. The kids were. I may well have breached the law. Again, it's a very fluid law, and there's no real specific thing on what is illegal, what isn't. But one of my kids I could rely on, you know, very much, and I would pay him to look after his brothers, you know. The older one, not so much. The second oldest was fantastic. Unfortunately, he was the one who ended up getting very, very badly injured. But my mum would help out, but my mum ended up very ill. She ended up having a heart attack. My twin sister was brilliant throughout. But every year that went on, a year got easier and easier.
As the kids grew up and you sort of adapt, and it must have been difficult for you. That's got to be a really difficult time. You're in a career that you kind of begrudgingly entered through circumstance and all these things. You're having a tricky time, but then that bizarre promotion and kind of a new world opens up with CID, and you've got your kids. And as you say, year on year, it starts to get easier. So do you start to enjoy the police work a bit more?
Well, I was just good at it. I never had to try. And most of it's to do with communication. Yeah. You know, and so I was just good at communicating, and I just learnt really on the cold face. I learnt by mistakes. I got in a lot of trouble. I must admit, a huge amount of trouble, because some of the people that were influencing me were quite corrupt or quite dangerous, you know. Some ended up getting arrested, you know. I don't know if... Yeah, one went to prison. But the other problem I had was that there was me with... I couldn't do overtime because I had to be at home. I was doing work at the weekends where I could, doing tree surgery. And I'd have my oldest boy helping me with that. So I ended up skint, very, very skint. So I had a mortgage. I had the kids. And every penny I had was going out. So I can remember 1 month I had something like £9 to last me 10 days. £9, you know. So I lived in poverty. And it's one thing with my story, I'm writing my book at the moment, is how I survived with nothing. I lived with my car, never had an MOT. I rarely had tax. And there was welfare reasons behind it, you know. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. I ended up in a social category that was akin to the prisoners I was bringing in. And whereas the people I was working with, a lot of them, they would intermarry, you know, very incestuous, the police, so they'd marry other coppers. So there's 2 incomes. with no children, you know, they're on an executive wage, and there's me with all the kids. I was getting less than someone on income support, you know, and it was awful. So everything I got, there's a lot of charity came my way, but my tyres would be bald on my car and things like that. And I can always remember, instead of talking to me and finding out what was going on, no, they didn't. They you know, always had to prove a point. There was one sergeant would see me drive my car, and I'd always park here down side streets or on council estates and things like that. And he was following me, and of course I've got no tax on my car, you know, and my tyres are bald, right? And I had to go and see the superintendent, and this sergeant pulls me and said, "Look, I've got to tell you, this other sergeant dragged me, and he's been following you, knows where you park your car." And he said, "Got to laugh, John. When you see him, look at his hands, look at his fingers." I said, "All right, why?" And he went, he sees your will, and part of the evidence, it's all about evidence with the old bill. It's not just the what you can see. That's called the visible circumference of a tyre. It's got to be the complete circumference. So they have to do like a manual examination, put their hands around. So the tyres are bald on the visual circumference. He's put his hand around the back of the wheel because it's down to bare thread, right. And it's got metal thread sticking out. And he's run his hand around and it's sliced all his fingers. It's sliced them deep as well.
Oh,
cut all his fingers. Of course, he's got a bandage on, you know, and there was stuff like that they're always trying. But I always got away with it, you know,
right?
And because they're spiteful. So, you know,
seems so counterproductive.
Oh, terrible. But and these are people that are no good at their job. Like I used to say to them, you can't nick yourself shaving, you know, whereas I was good at nicking people, very good at it, but I was always nice to people, you know, and it's, you know, people might not believe it, but I was very, very honest to people. And it always paid off, always, you know, and I'll tell you an anecdote of how much it has paid off from just having that intonation. So I ended up on the River Police, and for the first time in my life, it was like a nice rest. It was good. They taught me how to drive a boat. I ended up with like a ferryman's license because it's open water. It was very interesting. A lot of dead bodies and shit like that. But what happened was then that they had a sergeant there. It was really weird because it was classed as, it was at Wapping Police Station, the oldest police station in the world, built in 1798. Incredible building, and it was lovely. I loved working out there, and it had the old musty smell to it, you know, in the old Docklands. And it was classed as a port, so they had special branch posted there. So special branch had their own office there, and they had an intelligence office, right? And there was a sergeant in there, and he's all I loved about these old school coppers. He was a wily old detective, tough, inner core was very tough, hard little ginger-haired guy. And he was a stepping stone for my career, this fella. Okay. And he saw me and he saw how I was working, and he said, "Look, you're better than that. Like, they're lazy. I need someone. I want you working with me." I went, "Well, yeah, I'm sort of happy." He said, "Look, I'll sort it out. You'll have a good life with me. Come and work with me." He said, "I've got something going on. Don't want anyone else knowing about it, but it's to do with paedophiles that are now living on the canals, and our unit meant to cover the canals, and they're getting away with it." He said, "How do you feel about going out there as an intelligence officer and finding them?" I went, "Okay." He said, "Listen, I'll sort out a meeting, and I want you to introduce you to some people." So I then go to this meeting, and it was in the Tower of London, funny enough, and it was officers from the paedophile unit at Scotland Yard. So sat down and we had a drink and a chat, and they said, "Look, we hear that you're being put up as an intelligence officer for this thing on the canals." I went, "Yeah." He said, "Look, we'll be coordinating it. What do you need?" I said, "Well, I'm rubbish at paperwork." So they appointed a secretary to me. So I had my own secretary.
Fantastic.
And she was an analyst as well, so she was brilliant. So he said, "You go and get the info for us, and you won't have we'll cover your back. We'll deal with it your end. You come and work with us." And they said, "This is national, so it's run by the National Criminal Intelligence Service." I was like, "Right, okay." And I was thinking, it's a bit high. And then what happened then was that they said, look, we know of 2 paedophiles that are living on these canal boats, and there's many reasons, but we're not too sure why, but I know they can hide. So if you can find another 2 in the next couple of months, we'll be happy. Well, in the first month, I found 90. And
So 90.
90, yeah. And it skyrocketed. And then there was a guy had written a book called No Human Touch. And he'd gone in the newspaper, and it was his life of crime. And it's about his life in the care system, then through criminality, living on the streets of London, male prostitute, criminal, heroin addict, and now Christian, and now calling out. And he's put his email address, or what, I don't even think email was about him, phone number or whatever, I know. Anyone who's got any stories like this or needs any help, any issues I've raised on child abuse, get in touch. So I rang him, and it turned out he lived 3 streets away from me. And he said, where are I? I told him, and he went, well, I'm only around the corner, so come and see me. So I went to see him. And he'd been brought up in a care home. He'd been raped the first day going in by priests. He'd been abused. Everywhere he went, he was raped. He ended up as a prostitute on the streets of London. And he started telling me things about child murders and wealthy people. And he was a victim of an attempted murder by some very wealthy guys that would drive around in a white Rolls Royce picking up rent boys in London and killing them. And they tried to kill him, but he survived. And they lived in Hampstead.
Oh, John.
Right. And I was sitting there thinking, well, what a story. And so I thought, well, can you come to the police station and give a talk? He went, yeah. So he gave a talk on basically how a paedophile works. So I started putting these talks together, and then I got a criminal profiler from Cambridgeshire, actually Cambridgeshire Police, and they had a lot of transient paedophiles because Cambridge is a very, it's quite unique in criminal profiling because it's got the most diverse population of any town, Peterborough, in the whole of the country.
Really?
And this guy, he was a copper, but he was a profiler, but he was an expert in transient paedophiles. And the Sex Offenders Registry Act had just come out. So I got in touch with him as well. And he gave a talk, and he said, why are there so many criminals from all round of the world in Peterborough? I went, well, the passport office? He went, well, that's for British passports. That's nothing to do with this. He went, think laterally. And I went, I don't know. I said, right, it's 4 hours from Peterborough to Dover. And it still didn't make much sense. He went, right, it's on the A1, the main artery road throughout the UK, as busy as the M1. And he said, 4 hours is a taco stop for a lorry. They're coming in the lorries, and that's where they jump out, the taco stop, and then they end up in Peterborough. So that's how they get connected. So it's one of them unique things. He said, you've got to look laterally, look at geographical profiling. So I started researching geographical profiling. He said, all your answers are there in front of you. You just got to find it. Why the canals? Why so many? Well, it turned out it was all to do with jurisdiction. It was to do with borough boundaries and the new Sex Offenders Registry Act, where they had to register as a sex offender on conviction, on caution, or completion of a prison sentence for a sexual offence. So they didn't want to sign this sex offenders register, so they were off running, you know. But they get caught, right? And you can walk about all you want, but you're going to get caught. You can drive in a car all you want, but at some point the police are going to stop you. But if you're in a canal boat, no one's going to stop you. And London was different because London is, the Metropolitan Police is different to a county force. It's got boroughs, and each borough is its own individual police force, its own individual police district. And the canals go between, they're so old, they form borough boundaries. So someone can live as a sex offender here on one bank, and on the 27th day move his boat over to that side, and then he's got another 28 days. And they can do it, and they don't have to register.
Wow.
But kids like boats. And then this programme, Rosie and Jim, come out with the BBC.
Yeah, I remember it.
Special needs kids were going on respite care on boats, and So there's all these things were going together, and it was a way of hiding. So I put all this together, and I did this presentation, and it got taken to Parliament, and the law got changed on the back of what I did, and it got reduced to 14 days instead of 28 days. So
more power to you, John.
Yeah. So this was one of. So all of a sudden I'm booming. You know, I start going to intelligence meetings at secure locations. I start linking in with the intelligence services. And what I found out is that intelligence services is so clever. The NHS has got an intelligence service. The post office has got one. The travel industry, ABTA, have got an intelligence service. They all filter back into the main military intelligence and everything else. They all filter in. And these groups I was invited to, everyone was sharing information on paedophiles. And then I realised this is huge. This is massive. So I then got linked in with criminal profilers, and I started learning criminal profiling. And I really found my place. And then what happened is information started coming in about politicians and people involved with the intelligence service. And then all of a sudden, my world changed.
Jesus.
And I was warned by a senior officer that said, senior in experience, as in rank, be careful, you'll get mentioned now, you know, in Scotland Yard. Anywhere else in policing, they'll love you. This, they don't, they hate you. And he said, we had, and he went on to name a couple of politicians. One in particular was Home Secretary, bang to rights for young boys. And each time it gets pulled, it's going to happen to you. Well, the next day, that was it. I got pulled from the inquiry. I was like, oh, really? Why? And they said, oh, you're needed back on patrol. And I went, no. And he said, look, I'm going to tell you now, there's pressure put on me. So it was then I realised there is a conspiracy. And pressure does come up from high up, you know. So I thought, wow, this is deep. And then I moved. I was offered any job I wanted. But I thought, no, I want to keep working with the kids. I started realising.
How did it affect you as a parent, John? You know, when you started to lift the lid and think, fucking hell, this is big.
Yeah, it was more this guy that started coming in and giving talks, someone that had been in the care homes, and was Paul. He started saying, you keep your kids tight, because they go in them care homes, they're in trouble. They're in a world of trouble. And I like to, you know, later on in the show, bring on a guy called Alan Merritt. Alan is a former resident of a care home, and Alan can fill in there. And it shows how now Alan, myself and other survivors, you know, we all work together to try and wake this government up and get the law, you know, working in our favour instead of attacking us, you know. So I then moved to the Vice unit. So I get put on Vice, I get put on a unit working with street prostitutes. All street prostitutes come from the care system, all of them. All on heroin, all working, you know, doing tricks on the street to pay for their drug habit. And they got a drug habit because they come from pain. It's an area of policing that doesn't work, and it really needs reviewing because it's a nonsense. You know, they were just arresting these girls. They weren't even getting any information off them, milking them for that. They were just number crunching. And they would have competitions how many prostitutes they could arrest in a night. So a pair, they'd put out 3 pairs around the red light areas of London, and if you arrested, you nicked 100 prostitutes. And a lot of them were mainly the same prostitute getting nicked 3 or 4 times a night. Yeah, they'd get a 50 quid fine each time, you know, and they'd have to go out and whore to pay for it, so it didn't work. You know, you'd get a good name for yourself. And I can remember once being out in the street, and there's a little girl there, and she's loitering, and I go and pick her up, and I think, well, so I take her into protective custody. She's loitering for punters, and she's a young girl. She's well underage. She's underfed. She's underweight, and she looks a mess. Right? She's got condoms in her pocket and all that, and she's a little kid. And then I get a call from over the radio. Get rid of her. Get rid of her. And I went, what? So get rid of her. And I went, well, I brought her in protective custody now. And they went, she's got scabies. She's going to infect the car, and she'll infect the room back at the neck. And that was a car off the street. So they wouldn't, because our team ended up getting the highest figures consistently after I joined, which again, I don't want to take the credit for it, but I will do because it's the truth. You know, our figure's going to be well down, and it was just wrong. It was just wrong. But I started getting these girls registered as informants working for me, and they all saying the same. You know, we come from the care homes, we're abused, and they were telling me of other young girls where they're working and who's running it. And there was one prostitute that was running the girls. So again, we got to look at what a paedophile is. A paedophile isn't just, you know, a weird-looking white bloke who lives with his mum. Who, do you know what I mean? And he's given names like Soppy Norman and things like that, didn't he, years ago? You know, paedophiles, women, you know, black people, Moroccans, Kosovan, Italians, you know, ginger-haired people.
Younger people.
Young people, exactly, you know. Young people, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, boom, 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 all of them. And it's one of them areas of criminality that's difficult to profile because it's across the board. There's no influence, whereas dishonest crime is a reserve of those lower down the economic food chain, as it were, you know. And needs mussing, but paedophilia, boom. This is how a pauper can know a king, you know, and this is what we're seeing.
Right.
Jimmy Savile, how did he know these people and all this? And I'm reading an interesting bloke by an aristocrat called Jason Horsley, and his brother was Sebastian Horsley. And Sebastian Horsley was linked into all the major criminals and everything. And he was a male prostitute, and it was all linked in with criminals were linking in with Maura Hindley and Brady and the celebrity circuit, and the crux of it was children, child abuse children. And this book is quite candid about, you know, this connection, and it's real. So I was then asked to look at a girl who keeps making an allegation that she's being pimped out. So I went to see her, and they said, look, she's lying. She keeps making it. Just get rid of her. So I came all the way up to Cambridgeshire, went to a secure unit, met with this girl, sat down with her. And, you know, and of course, these aren't nice kids. These are difficult kids to deal with, you know.
Of course.
You know, they're very anti-police, very anti-social. Some of them are absolutely crazy. And but they've been badly hurt, you know.
Deeply disturbed, John, yeah. I mean,
deeply disturbed, but at the end of the day, little kids, you know. So I'm with her, and she said, look, I'm not lying, John. She said, it's not just me, there's others. And she named a woman prostitute, right? She said, and my unit, the Vice unit, the Met Police Vice unit, knew about this woman. You know, her street name was Foxy. She's been convicted. You know, we got her convicted, and she went inside for pimping out kids. And she'd been doing it for years. There's intelligence on this woman going back 1.5 decades, you know. Yeah. And what had they done about it? Nothing. They'd rather just pursue some skanky street prostitute for what? For just for figures, you know. It was wrong. And yet this woman was pimping out kids. So this girl gave me the name of another girl. I went to see this girl, she gave me the name of another. And it became, boom, it was me and another girl just looking into it. And it was huge. And it started then linking into judges, police officers, people with the BBC names. And it was big restaurants, big posh clubs. Boom, it was all over. Kids, all from the care homes, all being pimped out. Very well organised, very well established. There was a contract put out on my life, which the police did nothing about. There was a guy who was put up to shoot or stab me outside a court after a hearing. It was just crazy. So I thought, well, enough's enough now. I need to put all this down in a report. There was social workers saying, look, John, we've been coming to your unit for over 10 years, and we've got loads of kids. So it started off in central London, and it started going everywhere. And it was all over the place. It was huge. So, you know, I put this report down, and there was concerns about the kids because the kids were involved in drug dealing and criminality and this county line stuff that is all on vogue now, but it's been going on for a long time. And some of these kids had HIV, some had tuberculosis. One girl had cysts in her vagina, and she would just ooze this pus out of her, and she was still being worked, you know.
Oh, my God.
One lad, he was in the latter stages of AIDS. He was about 12 years old. He was hanging on to life, still being pimped out. You know, and what was being done? Nothing. Everyone that puts their thing in that kid, that's rape. And so instead of dealing with a street prostitute, which isn't even what I call an either way offence, it can only be dealt with at magistrate. It's like a parking fine you haven't paid. It's that low level. They could be dealing with a life tariff flipping crime here. They're well interested. So I put a report in, and of course I'm thinking, right, this is going to be a game changer. We're going to move forward. But instead of that, I was threatened. Now, this has just come out in a civil case, but I was threatened with a very, very senior officer, you know, and just said, if you mention a word of it, you're going to lose your home, your job, your children. So this is where now I am starting to worry.
Jesus Christ, John.
Because
I mean, yeah.
I've got my little kids at home, and I'm being warned by people that have been in the care system, don't put your kids in care. Do not put your kids in care. If you put your kids in care,
that's it.
They're getting it.
They're in the machine.
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, and they're going to get abused, sexually abused, you know. And so, and I knew from previous dealings I'd had where there were politicians, there were senior coppers involved, that these threats were real. So what this guy said to me, if you mention a word of what you've uncovered, you're going to lose your home, your job, your children. Now, I want to bear that in mind, home, job, children, right? And that's what he said, right? You will be thrown to the wolves. You have no idea who or what you're dealing with. And I didn't, you know. Now, why did that guy tell me that? Well, I think he was, firstly, he was trying to warn me. But secondly, there was a threat there because he and many others were probably involved in something very dark and very sinister. Again, okay, I can't prove that. I made a criminal allegation. I've been through the civil court, and again, I still can't. So it's only allegedly. But why would any civil servant, any person appointed at high office want to cover this up? Why? It just doesn't make any sense until you see the bigger picture and you see what's come out with the government inquiry, the IICSA independent inquiry, of which I was given evidence at, that this is a national problem and this is very organised criminality, and kids are a commodity. Kids are better at money making than guns or drugs. You can use drugs once, you can use a kid many times, and there's money, you know, and of course ultimately some kids die as a result. Maybe some of that's down to lifestyle, but some of that is also criminality, and there's money to be earned. And I had information of two very well-known gangsters and the fact that they were trading kids knowing that they would be killed in sex parties. Again, I've got to be careful because I've had people contact me that have got family connections to this family, said, you shouldn't be saying this. I'm not frightened, you know, but it's not my world, but, you know.
There's no easy way to have any angle on this kind of conversation, is there?
Well, why would anyone want to hurt a kid? You know, it's simple as that. And then we got to look at the stats. 80% of the prison population, the male prison population, come from an abused background. Majority of heroin addiction, class A drug addiction, opiate addiction comes from sexual abuse. You know, what is going on? Why are they not sorting this out? And then why are they attacking those that come forward? We're seeing survivors coming forward and either going to prison or getting sued. You know, there's one woman, she was abused by a politician. She spoke out, he's tried to sue her, but he lost the case. But he tried to sue her, she's got nothing. He tried to sue her for £1 million. Well, good luck with that, she's got nothing. You know, she's not even got her health because of what he did to her. And he's a politician, I'm not going to name him, but he's always there claiming he's helping survivors of abuse. So,
of course, yeah, of course.
You know, we see it time and time again. And I mean, I've had information from officers about so many actors, singers. I mean, I can't even watch Netflix anymore because I look at it thinking, I know that man's. And of course, with me, what I do now, getting people's testimonies, the same names keep cropping up time and time and time again. And these go from the top right the way through the system. So I'm now threatened, I'm frightened, and I'm genuinely frightened. And I'm told, just go and be with your kids. And I thought, well, how can this guy be so confident and stand there? And there was a witness in the room. There was a woman that was there who was in charge of the HR department who made a statement in court, which was, and I brought up in court, the civil hearing, that she's a liar. And I told the judge, the woman, if she relies on a statement, she's a liar. And she stood and denied that this went on. And, you know, shame on this woman. I'm not going to name her. I could name her because it's gone through the court. Yep. But I'm not. And she's involved in a charity now, helping people, and she's lied. She had a chance to do good, and she chose to lie.
Why do you think?
Because her job will be at risk, because she was present when I was threatened and did nothing. So the onus is now on her, on the vicarious liability front. But again, where's her moral backbone? She hasn't got one. Shame on this. And actually, that hurt me more than the guy who threatened me, because I know that he's a weak man and a tosser for doing that, and an evil man, you know. And I don't think that we could ever butter him up any other way. Whereas this woman claims to be a woman that's got a position of benevolence, and even in a private life tries to do benevolent work. But I'm thinking, no, you're a liar. You're a liar. And so that I found a big act of betrayal on behalf of that, because I had a lot of respect for that woman, you know, and I did. And again, I could well within my rights to name shame. I'm not here to cause anyone pain.
No, I understand that, John. It's about learning about what's happening.
There's no mileage in that, you know, no mileage in that.
Yeah.
So I'm frightened now, and of course I start drinking. You know, things start sliding downhill. So I move on to another unit, but I continue dealing with children, because I know it's the only way for me. This is what we're doing. So I go on to a child abuse unit in Haringey, and I was told that there are no cases of child sexual exploitation in Haringey over the last 2 years. Within 10 minutes, I'd found 10 children in 10 minutes. By the end of the first week, I'd found 50 kids. You know, so again, I set up a unit to look into this, and then it all comes crashing down again. I get threatened by someone who runs, who's in charge of child sexual exploitation for a major children's charity. There's 2 children's charities that always come to mind. Yeah. Again, I won't name it, but this woman threatened me. You know, you can't go doing this, and start shouting at me. You know, and she's in one of these kids charities. So I say to people, be careful where your money goes.
Yeah.
Be very careful where your money goes, because look at Childline, right? All the years that I was working on child abuse investigations, we had referrals. Do you know, all the years, all the cases, and there was many, I dealt with one case that was a referral from Childline. So where do them referrals go?
Yeah.
Where do they go? I mean, they certainly don't get through to investigations. So, you know, and what have they done? What have they done to change the situation? Nothing. They made a lot of money, I know that. And another charity, again, they were active in stopping people like me doing our job.
It's fucking abhorrent and frightening on levels I can't even comprehend, John.
Yeah, so I moved again, and then sort of my life isn't really going the way it should be going, you know. And I sort of tread water for a few years, because my kids are young, and I know that if I speak out. But what happens is there's a game changer, because the case is going through the court of this young girl named Zoe, who came forward, the one I went to see in Cambridgeshire, who spoke out. She ends up dead on the street, and that broke me. You know, I'm like, hang on, this is wrong. And it was a very suspicious death. This brave girl, you know, that came forward, and I thought, no, this, and something starts eating me up, and then stories start coming out, and then Jimmy Savile dies, and my God, that was it. Boom! These stories were pouring out, and I'm like, wow. And then I start hearing of other police officers that have been threatened. So I thought it was just me. I thought I'd done something horrifically bad. I thought, my God, it's me. I'm an idiot. You know, they're right and I'm wrong. And then I realised, no, you know, this is what they do. And there was a lady from the north of England who exposed a massive child trafficking thing. They made a drama out of it. I got in touch with her, and she was very good to me. She actually even came forward at my civil case to give evidence, and she also gave evidence at the government inquiry. So we still continued doing the same thing years later. And she said, look, they're going to come for you. They'll start doing you for data protection violations, because it's so easy. They'll go through all your intelligence indice searches, You know, because you're dealing with information all the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They're going through all of that, and she said they'll find a violation, and not just one, they'll find many. They're out to nick you because they did it to me. And okay, and then there was a case in Jersey, Haute de la Garenne, a kid's home, where not only had kids been sexually abused, they'd been killed in a dungeon. Underneath there was rumours of rituals, and they'd filled this basement in with mud, with slurry. And there was a guy went out there. He was in the Met Police, and he went to Scotland. Then he got a job out there. And his name's Lenny Harper, senior officer. Went out there and he started looking into it, and he ran the investigation into this kid's home, and he managed to. He did a proper job. You know, he took anthropologists, archaeologists. They excavated the cellar. And like kids said, they were chained, they were put in a bath, they were cut, they were mutilated. And he found a bath, there was blood splatters, he found the handcuffs, and they found skull, they found bone fragments. And it was identified by a sniffer dog as being human. That was given to an anthropologist. Anthropologist said, yes, that's the skull of a child aged between 7 and 10. They identified certain bits which would quantify that, and the bone was sent off for proper forensic authentication on the matter, you know, and that was it. So they've now got the whole story. What the kids have said has now been backed up with evidence. Of course, people that were involved in raping these kids and hurting these children linked into people high up in office there. And they're clear failing by the police, which is what we saw in Rotherham, Rochdale, and blah, 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 all over the place. And dovetailing in with what I was told, you know, what the kids were telling me, where they were going, how they were being pimped out and everything else. Bear in mind, we hear stories from Luton, from Aylesbury, from Blackburn, from Lancashire, we don't hear one case from London. Not one case from London, the largest city in Europe. You know, the most diverse city in the world, not one case. You know, so the glorious leader of the Metropolitan Police, you know, she is under scrutiny now.
Yeah.
They want her to leave. And I say to people, get her out. She's failed. And she has failed on a massive level when it comes to child abuse. A huge, and her predecessor, Bernard Hogan Howe, he should be removed from his position in the House of Lords as protectorate of children, you know.
So Cressida Dick, who is that lady you speak of at this moment in charge of the Metropolitan Police, how much influence does she have? Because when you're uncovering all this and you're finding that this goes up into political level, elite, corporate level, how much influence does she have?
Well, a huge amount. And I told her to her face.
Right.
And I said to her, you know, look, you can take a kid out of a care home, you can abuse that kid, you can rape that kid, you can sell that kid to other people, you can get that kid to get a friend involved. You've not appointed one officer to deal with it. But if I was to lean over my fence and call my neighbour or whatever, I said, you'd have me arrested, bang, 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 bang. How is that right? And after I blew the lid on what was going on with the Vice Unit, they never appointed for 7 years another officer to look at child prostitution for 7 years. And it says she could do a lot. She was told to her face. So she's failed, you know, and again, this was something that was brought up in my civil hearing.
That can't be her choice to ignore that, though, surely.
Well, she did, you know, she did.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, her and Bernard Hogan Howe, they were the architects of the attack on me.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
And no two ways about it. You know?
Okay, that's interesting.
They could have done everything, you know, and that's one thing that sort of I was very vocal about, and I've been vocal on every level. You know?
It seems to me, John, outside looking in, that there must be, you know, parallel to the Epstein situation we've got over in America, and obviously the royals that are involved and all sorts of names. It's almost as if, you know, you lift the lid, someone like Cressida Dick is lifting the lid on levels above her that they just ignore. They just, like you say, suppress, push it.
Well, you had the Minister for Policing and Crime. So he's the cabinet minister that's appointed, you know, at Parliament, at Premiership level, you know, prime ministerial level to adjudicate over what goes on in the UK. And he held her accountable. Said, right, you're to come to a meeting and explain yourself. She didn't even bother turning up. And he got in touch with me and said she didn't even turn up. I've had meeting after meeting with the Home Secretary's office, you know, parliamentarians, crime commissioners, you know, all on this matter. And again, nothing, they don't do anything. You know, we're being failed at every level. The only time they do anything is when there is an independent inquiry. They're dragged in. My evidence at the independent inquiry was corroborated more times than any other evidence. 5 occasions it was corroborated by the CPS, by different social services and survivors. John Wedge is right, John Wedge is right, John Wedge is right. And again, there's a lot of pain behind what I said. It's very loaded.
Jesus Christ.
So I don't get any brownie points for doing this. You know, all of us suffer monumentally. But so what happened was then I thought, right, I've got to speak up because I know that this is being failed. So I went and made an allegation to the Corruption Command of high-level malfeasance in a public office, of corruption. It's very strange because they're this separate unit, they're police officers, this anti-corruption, and they're in a very secure building. But I was making allegations so very high up, and I wanted to speak to a senior officer. I was not going to speak to a police constable. It just weren't happening. I wanted a detective and I wanted a senior one, but I wanted a woman. So I rung them up, and this police constable rang up and said, sorry, mate, I'm not talking to you. Said, I want a minimum of a superintendent or a detective chief inspector woman. And I went, okay. And I got it. So I got this appointment to go and make this criminal allegation. On the way up there to this building, I'm accosted by a detective inspector who was on the vice unit with me, and speaking about people I was on the vice unit with. I'm thinking, that's really odd. Why are you doing this? On the way up, on the corridor going in.
Literally.
Yeah. Oh, start talking about the detective chief superintendent. Oh, he screwed things up, and we were all trying to do the right thing, John. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. Nice to see you, but I thought, that's really odd. So he knew this guy, before he even got in there. Anyway, I get in there, and this woman comes up to me. She said, she's a woman detective chief inspector. She said, why me? Why have you slipped that woman? I said, because you can't roll up your trouser leg, right? And she laughed, and she said, oh, no, I'm happy with that. I'm with you. The inference being, women can't be Masons, right?
Oh, okay.
The funny trouser leg brigade, the Masons. Now, again, this is something they tried to discredit me from, a civil case about conspiracy theories.
Topic of the time.
I said, really? Come on now. Of course there's a conspiracy, but I'm not going down that line. That it's all aliens and it's all Jewish mafia and it's all this. I'm not doing that. It's nonsense.
No, you're dealing with what you are sniffing out in front of your face.
But the strange thing is, I think series 4 or series 5 of that drama Line of Duty, the BBC, I reckon that's based on my case, because it's all to do with children, people high up, and one officer who speaks out, a whistleblower, he says word for word, you can't roll. He wants to see a woman because you can't roll up your trouser leg.
Interesting,
and
John.
I'm like, oh, and that's a bit. Someone said to me, John, you've got to watch that. I think that's to do with you.
Right.
Anyway, so I make this allegation, and they're like, right, we're going to look after you. But that's when the world turns on me, and all of a sudden I'm under investigation. So I've made very, very serious allegations, right? My interview went on over a period of days, and I expected a proper Rolls-Royce investigation. So what you do when an allegation is made, that person you're alleging against has background checks, and they're brought in and they're interviewed under caution, or they're arrested. With an allegation of that magnitude, they should have been arrested. So 3 senior officers, do you know what they did? They picked up their phone, they just rung them up and said, look, John Wedge just said that you've done this. And they went, no, okay, boom. And that was it. And they wrote it off. They said, no, we spoke to him. Well, how? Oh, we spoke to him on the phone. We rang him up. And they denied it. And that's it. We're happy with that.
That's just insane.
Yeah. And, of course, it went off to like a national crime squad put in to look at it. And, again, they didn't give me any updates for 2 years. They didn't tell me what was going on, nothing. And I complained. And they wrote back to me, the IOPC, and they said, Mr. Wedge, if you write to us again, we're not even going to open your letters. So, you know, even they wouldn't help. But then the attacks were on me, so I then start getting served with discipline paperwork for data protection violation. All sorts of bizarre things keep happening. There was one that they alleged that I was conspiring to supply Class A drugs, and they said, but they've got evidence to get me 15 years in prison. Absolute nonsense. It was a bizarrest load of crap going, but it kept coming and coming and coming, one after another, after another.
Just tarnishing you.
Yeah.
Trying to break you.
Trying to break me down, and then I went sick. Cresta Dick promised to pay me. She said, you've been treated appallingly. And then she didn't pay me. The next thing, I've got no money. And under her, she gave me a word, you'll get paid. You'll get paid. You know, while this is ongoing and you're off sick, you'll continue to be paid. You suffered an injury on duty. And next thing, no money. No money at all. Oh, man, they tried to sue me for threats to kill senior officers, threats to burn down Scotland Yard, attempting to supply heroin. Mad stuff. And then I got no money. And you know, things are just, so all of a sudden, what I'm looking at now, losing my home because I can't pay my bills. Looking at losing my job because I've got 9 cases, discipline cases against me. So home, job, and then the last one was children.
And what are your relationships with the coppers that you're shoulder to shoulder with at that time? Is that all changing? Are they aware of it?
They've all rode for sure. All of them rode for sure. One was good. One guy was good. I had another boss I worked with years ago. He stood by me to the end. He very brave man.
Mm-hmm.
And when I write, I'm going to really praise him up. Very strong guy, Irish fella. You know, and yeah, two of them. The rest of them, boom, they were on their boat and they're rowing for sure. You know, the lot of them. And then of course, like I said, you know, there's others that were asked of statements and wouldn't. And then one that lied. You know, it was so awful what she'd done. And so I'll never forgive the woman. You know, and of course these threats. And then where it turned for me was Lenny Harper said to me that they'll hit you with all sorts of nonsense. Right? They'll want you to commit suicide. It's a pattern they use all the time. They're going to break you financially. They will shut down your bank account. And they'll do anything to come for you, even with your kids, right?
Jesus Christ.
And I'm like, well, next thing, my bank account gets shut down. So I can't access any money. My bank account got shut down. They said there's an investigation, we're seizing it. So it was NatWest Bank shut my account down. I'm thinking, flipping, I couldn't get any money out. So he was right. And then something awful happened is one of my children was involved in a horrific accident. And he was taken to a specialist hospital in Cambridge, miles away from my home, and he was basically, he's going to die. I think he died initially, they revived him, he undergoes emergency surgery. He's now paralysed.
Is this your second oldest son you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, he's...
the one who was brilliant looking after the younger ones.
Yeah. You know, he was my rock really. So he's now just hanging on to life. So what happens then is he's in a coma, and I'm travelling up to the hospital, and it's cost me a fortune. I'm sleeping in my car. I'm giving blood at the blood donor thing because they give you a little sticker. I'm a blood donor, and I could put it in my car, and I could park in the blood donors bay then, because otherwise I couldn't park anywhere. Getting parking tickets, and the girl I work with, you know, she saw me and said, "Oh my God, you look terrible." And I told her what's happened. So she went and told the senior officers, "Look, you need to ease up on him, on John Wedge. Do you know what's happened to his son?" Then one day I get a call from the hospital. I just got home from visiting him, and they want me back. So I go all the way back, and there's 3 consultants there, and they said, "I'm sorry, we've lost him. He died." And I'm like, "What? How? He was all right." And they went, "Well, his heart stopped. He's gone into organ failure. We've got him on 100% life support now. we've managed to get a brain algorithm, but he's been dead for 10 minutes. And they said, we need permission to turn the machine off. You can have 5 days, but because he's on 100% ventilation, it's exploding all the alveoli. His lungs are going to be beyond repair. And his life expectancy, he's going to be brain damaged anyway. If he gets through this, if he wakes up, he's not going to live long, you know. So I said, well, what do I do? And they said, well, look, just stay with him. While you've got time, just stay with him. So I go into, so it's in the ICU, but then they got an ICU within an ICU. So he's there with a team around him. And there's every pipe and wire. And there's this poor lad there, just like, he's gone, you know, and he's out of it. He's, you know, and full, you know, full resuscitation, you know, whatever it is, life support, sorry. So that was hard. That was very hard to deal with. But strange thing happened on the third day. You know, I was just praying. And I had an argument with God. And I turned around and I said, you know, you've had me looking after kids. Look what it's done. I said, I lose my son. Don't expect me to help anyone else's. And I cursed single parents. I cursed them. So why should I pick up the pieces for these people who can't be bothered with their children? Why should I help when people are having sex with their kids?
God, what a difference.
You know, and I said, God, you know, why aren't you giving them pain? Why are you giving me pain? You know, I help the kids. I don't know. And why am I getting pain? This isn't fair. I said, if my son dies, that's it. We're finished. And I said, we're finished. I'm not helping anyone. Well, I go back. I sit down with him, and he opens his eyes. His eyes open. I'm like, what? And I said, T, that's his initials. I said, T, grab my hand. And he squeezes my hand with his left hand. I said, squeeze with your right, and he does. So I know.
He can communicate.
Just move your toes. And he moved his toes. Oh, thank God. I'm going home. He's going to live. I'm thinking, thank you, God. Right. I'll go home thinking, that's it. You know, this life's going to change now. So I go home, and as I go home, 2 police officers there. And then they said, we're arresting you for child neglect because my 15-year-old was left while I was at hospital. So, but my older boy was there, you know, he was like 26 or something. So then they said, look, they're going to take me to the police station, you know, and interview me. But then I thought, no, I'm not having this. So I told the older one, I said, look, this is what's happened. And he told me the Met Police have sent us down there because it's a county force, sent us down there and they've lied. And you've been stitched up, son. He said, and he was good. He
just looking to catch you out.
Yeah. He realised the situation. He said, we're going to leave you be. And the younger one, he was all for nicking me. And he was like looking through my cupboard to make sure there's food there. And they interviewed my youngest son, you know, took him away and interviewed him. But they let me alone. They left me alone. And I just thought, right, nothing can hurt me now. You've hurt me more than anyone can. So I fought back. And then what I started doing was I managed to get out of the police. I got an ill health pension and I got out of there. Left on abhorrent terms. Again, they tried to withhold my pension and everything, but every single case against me was dropped. Everything was dropped. And then I thought, well, I've got these skills, and I was a specialist interviewer. I thought, well, I'm going to use them. So I started going out there, and I linked in with a guy called Billy Maloney, probably the bravest man I've ever met in my life, an ex-care home survivor who just goes out there and basically hits people hard, you know, politicians, whoever, and he's frightened of no one. He's a lion. So I linked in with him, and then I started using my iPhone and going around and interviewing people that had been failed by the system. And I started getting then linked in with ex-gangsters, serious gangsters, all been through the care homes, and then survivor groups. And then I got a call one day off a guy, and he said, look, I've been following your work. And, you know, and I went from no one knowing me to the fastest growing podcaster on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I was getting 1 million followers a month. I was getting more than, I think it was the Daily Mirror.
Right.
Getting more followers than they were.
So those interviews you're doing, John, with your phone, are you kind of publishing them publicly, or are they internal? Sort of?
They were all live.
Yeah.
So everything was live. There was no pre-record, and I was dealing with some very potentially volatile people.
Mm-hmm.
There was no belt, brace, or string. It was straight out there.
Yeah.
And then I got a message from a guy, and he said, "Can we have a chat?" And he said, "I've been following you." He said, "I was in a care home called Beach Home. Have you heard of it?" I said, "Yeah, I have actually." And it was in the borough of Wandsworth. And this guy saying, "Look, I'm going to serve some papers on them for how they treated us. Would you like to come along?" And I thought, yeah. So I said, "I'll be outside the town hall, Hammersmith and Fulham Town Hall, tomorrow, you know, and I'm going to serve papers on them." I said, "Well, I'll come down and I'll film it." So I went down there, and this is where I'm going to bring on Alan Merritt. This is where I met Alan. And Alan was there in the cold rain with his bundle of papers. And I said, "Right, let's do an interview." Next thing, security have picked us up and chucked us off the premises. And we're like, hang on, we're entitled to do this. Anyway, so there was a lot of arguing. But whilst we're talking to him, we got in touch with the chief executive. And he said, "Okay, I'm willing to entertain you." So they allowed Alan to go in and serve papers on this guy. And then from there, Alan set up a survivor group with other survivors from the care home, and then we started doing stuff together from there.
Okay.
And things just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew.
Fantastic.
This is how it goes. So I've got Alan with us. This is Alan Merritt.
Welcome, Alan. Welcome to Tudor Chat. Thanks for your time, Alan.
AKA Big Bad Alan Merritt. You know, and Alan is one of the founder members of the Beach Home Survivors, and Alan has teamed up with other ex-residents and really trying to get the story out there and the word out there and hold someone accountable for the horrors that went in. I mean, Beach Home is one of many children care home institutions that were up and down the country, in which, you know, kids were placed in there. They were meant to be a place of safety. It was anything but. The trafficking, you know, we see this term now, human trafficking, but it's always gone on, you know, and then the kids are put in there. Certain kids get it worse than others, and there is a reason for that. And that's usually if the protection there is from the parents a visit, then they're quite mindful of that. But if there's no one coming for them kids, they're going to get hurt, you know. And then they'll be passed on. They'll be taken out. Kids from Beach Home were taken to Elm Guest House, you know, and that came out. That's come out. I've spoken to quite a few people that were in Beach Home and many other places. And, of course, they'll go from Beach Home to care homes like Shirley Oaks, and they'll pass around. And money is made out of this. We was up in Scotland last year to Quarriers. There's a care home called Quarriers. And what they found out was that the kids, every time they were moved to a different care home, money was exchanged. So it was the same as when they were delivering slaves. So when a slave was delivered from one place to another, there was a levy was put on. And then if they were moved on again, then they were paid. And it's the same thing happened with kids. So they're money making. And a kid in a care home now can make that person, they're a bit different from before. There were big institutions. Now they're more of a localised concern. £2,000 per child per week, you know.
Oh my fucking God, that's all I seem to say in this podcast so far is Jesus Christ and oh my God. But I just, you know, and I have looked into some of this and listened to a lot of your work, and I'm aware to a degree of, but when you're taking it literally from the horse's mouth, as we're going to find out now with you, Alan, with your story, it's mesmerising to think that this is...
John made a very, very good point there when he said, like, children are worth money. You know, at birth, there's a saying, and there's a lot of cliches here that we're probably interlinked, is at birth, you know, they say you're worth your weight in gold. Well, we don't actually deal in gold. We deal in sterling. So we're worth, you know, our weight in sterling, and we're sold off. We're made fictions at birth. And the state basically takes us over and puts us in this straw man type of fiction. And I challenge that now. I do a lot of common law stuff. I intend to take OneSelf on. I've done a lot of steps to change things and put myself in a kind of similar situation without saying too much because of what I'm trying to do, and it's ongoing. But it takes a long, long time. You can't beat the system, they say. You can have a very good try, and a lot of people have some success, or some people have some success, but a lot of people don't, because the system is there for certain people and certain individuals, and the higher you go, the worse it gets.
So what was the entry point for you? What's your story, Alan, and how does it start for you?
Well, crumbs. Well, I was born in Shepherd's Bush, London, West London. I was one of 4 children, 2 sisters and another brother. And we lived in a place called Mardell Street, just off the Gold Hawk Road in London. All born in Hammersmith Hospital. And I was born on the 25th of March, 1955. And I was the youngest of the 4 of us. I was the baby of the family. And I had it quite bad. My parents were abusive to me. My mum hit me with stiletto heel shoes. Hit you on the head with stiletto heel shoes. My father took a leather belt to me as a child, and I used to hide under the kitchen table in a box under this table, a big table. It's funny looking at this one, and it was a hiding place for me, a little boy, and that's where I used to hide when my dad came in, and they were both alcoholics, and we used to live outside pubs. We were taken to the pubs and we were given probably a packet of crisps and some lemonade, and the streets were our playground, and we'd be there in all sorts of weather, freezing cold, pouring rain, sleet, fog, snow, the lot, you name it, we were there. And I remember my first house in Mardell Street, my mum had left the iron on in the house when she went to the pub, and it burnt the house down. And while we was all at the pub, because they just took us to the pub and left us outside the pub, and every now and then came out to see if we were there. We might be down the next street or something like that. Yeah. We used to get up to all sorts of things as children, and I always remember, and it always, even to this day, it just doesn't leave me. I remember going back and seeing the fire engines and the water all over the road at this house, and it all blacked out. And they found my toy. I had this little toy tortoise, and you pulled it on a string, and as you pulled the tortoise, its front legs and back legs moved. Yep. Because of the damage it was like, badly damaged from the fire. And I always remember that. And then because of that, they would put us into a place called Stowe Road in Shepherd's Bush, and that was more near between the Uxbridge and the Gold Hawk Road. And we had this cellar, and it was, well, in them days we had a smog. I remember the yellow smog that used to come down, and Gold Hawk Road, you still had the trams used to go up to it. I think it was the last place in London where the trams were taken away from. And in them days, they used to have a cover on the street, and they used to lift this cover up and put the coal in, and it used to go down into your cellar for your coal fires. So in them days, we didn't have any heating. It was just a fire in the front room, and that was our only heat. But we used to get these rats that used to come into the house and through the cellars. And they were like sewer rats, and these sewer rats were massive. They were the size of small dogs. And we had this toilet downstairs, and we wouldn't go down to the toilet at night because all we could hear the rats screeching. And a couple of times, if you peered out there, you could probably see the eyes. And they sometimes clawed at the bedroom window. And as 4 children, we all slept in like a double bed. My 2 sisters and my brother in this double bed. And it was only 2 bedrooms in this flat. My mum and dad slept in the other, and we had to pee in a bucket. If we wanted to go to the toilet, we had to use a bucket. And it was a very, very tough times, and very, very difficult. I mean, our biggest treat, I think, was a thing called pie and mash. We used to have pie and mash and liquor. And I can remember we used to have a television, and it used to have sixpences that used to put in the back of the television to make the... Mm-hmm. And he used to get a rebate, so a guy would come round, and he'd give you so much money back, right? And that was their piss-up money. So they'd go out on the piss again, we'd be left to be roaming the streets or doing something. And every now and then they'd give us the odd sixpence or something like that, and we'd go to the pie and mash and have a treat. But, you know, we used to live off bread and dripping.
Right.
And very, very scarce. Well, we never ate anything healthy. But between this time, between 0 and 6 years of age, I was placed in 5 different children's homes. They called it respite care. So if they thought in them days, they was called childcare officers, CCOs. They call them social workers now. But in my day, it was childcare officers. And the childcare officers would come and have a look at what was going on and so on and so forth. And anyway, cut long story short, I was in Elsfield House, which was a holding pen and used by Wandsworth Council quite a bit. And then you distribute it to different children's homes. I remember Oakley Street, at Albert Bridge. And in my younger years, I don't know what happened to me. I can't remember too much of what happened to me. I remember the sort of military position everything was done in, the rows of sinks, like all in a row, and everything was kind of like had a place and a procedure and a way, and then you'd go back to your parents, and then something could happen, then you'd be put back into care. And I had this up until I was 6 years of age, and then I was taken before Marylebone Magistrates Court on the Euston Road. And this judge is looking down at a 6-year-old child, and this is from my point of view, and it says to me, "Would you like to go to the seaside, sonny boy?" And I'd never been to the seaside, and of course, excited child looking up, and I'm trying to make out what all this is all about. You know, I'm looking at a unicorn, and I think, what's one of them, and the lion, and the signia of everything, and you know, what it's all standing and what it all means. I didn't know. And when this guy is promising me that I'm going to get something that I've never had, I'm lapping it up. Of course, I want to go.
Yeah.
So that was the start of 11 years of abusive childcare in a place called Beach Home, which
What was the dynamics of your mum and dad? Were they in love? Were they volatile to each other? Were you, I mean, you being the youngest, Alan, were you watching your older siblings getting beatings, and were you watching this happen and it was happening to you? And what were your mum and dad like together?
Yeah. You can remember. I can remember bits and pieces, not great things, because I would have been of the age of 4 and 5 when I can remember bits and pieces. If you can remember before that, then you're a far better person than I, and I won't even go into them realms. But I don't remember too much about it. I see it happening. Sometimes you accepted what happened. You just thought it's part of life. You was in this environment.
That's what's normal.
You went with it.
Yeah.
But my dad was a very, very scary man, and John was talking earlier on, and he would take on the world. He'd fight the world. He was a bare fist fighter, and he would knuckle fighter. He'd fight. And he'd stand on in his piss state in his long johns. He used to have these white long johns. And remember, there's just certain images that stick in your mind.
Yeah.
And his white long john top and bottoms, and his yellow pissy stained long john bottoms. And he'd just be fucking off to the whole street and telling them all to fuck off. And I was going to come out and sort them all out, or shut the noise, or whatever the case might be.
Did you know anything about their upbringings?
No. I've not even tried to trace it, because once I went into Beach Home, I never saw my dad again.
Wow.
And like my eldest sister Anne, who's 5 years difference between me, I used to call her Mummy Anne, because she had the responsibility of virtually looking after us. I know that sounds strange, the way of putting it, but my oldest sister was like my...
I think it's common, isn't it?
like a Mummy Anne. And that's what I called her, Mummy Anne. And she did look after me. I mean, I remember cutting my hand open in a mirror outside Stowe Road and smashing this window, and taking me in a pram to Hammersmith Hospital so I could get stitched up and things like that. She just look after you, your general welfare and everything. But it was such an abuse. We done things like there was this 15 foot high wall at the back of us, and we used to climb along it and used to go to the tip. And even at a young age, 4 or 5, I was climbing along this wall, and there was this concrete tip. And in them days, the tips were more in the streets, and so they'd have a section of area that was concreted off, these concrete blocks, and that was the tip, and everything used to be chucked into there.
Mm-hmm.
That was a playground to children. That was our playground, and we used to go there, and of course we used to be careful because of the rats, because you get these big rats and things like that. And I remember chucking something once and hitting a child and it splitting his head open, and I knew my dad was going to kill me, and I was hiding. I was too frightened to go home, and I managed to sneak down the wall and creep up the stairs and try to hide under the table, but I knew I was going to get beaten, and they'd beat the living shit out of me. Because I'd done this, and I remember watching this child going down the road with his father, and him grabbing him, holding him by the hand. And this guy had this kind of like almost like a turban in him, where he had this bandage that wrapped his head up, running. And I thought, Christ, I didn't mean to do it. I was just playing as a child.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was placed into Beecham, that's when I was in 4 cottages in Beecham over 11 years, and I was in 3 very abusive cottages out of 4. They separated my brothers and sisters, my sisters and my brother into different cottages. So we was all separated. So we was never a kind of family unit ever again.
Is that a standard application that they would split up siblings as opposed to keep them together for support?
Some families were put together, some families weren't.
Right.
Some brothers and sisters were together. I don't know why. In our case, we did ask if we could be put together. But I remember I went to Beecham. I was taken there like in this kind of like Black Maria.
Mm-hmm.
I got here and I was kind of like went in through to the offices where this clock tower was, and walked into the offices there, and it was almost like I was being vetted or psychoanalyzed or worked out, or whatever the word you want to use. And there's all these staff in there. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I'm more interested in seeing the seaside. I want to go and see the sea. I'm dying to get out of there to find out where the sea is. So then they take me after I was processed to a kind of like stores, come food store where they used to take deliveries to all the cottages, 24 cottages in Beecham. And they held up to about 20, 30 kids. So you had a boys' dormitory and a girls' dormitory, and you'd have the top end and the bottom end. So there was 12 houses down one end and 12 houses up the other end. It was like a little town. It was huge. It had its own swimming pool, its own stores, its own primary school, its own sick bay, like a little mini hospital.
Yep.
And it had top fields, bottom fields, massive place. And it ran between Banstead and Epsom Downs, where Banstead Station is, and Epsom Downs Station. Virtually the length of that from Newark to Drift Bridge in that area. And I remember they took me to these stores and they gave me some clothes. And then they took me out of my clothes that I had at home. It wasn't much. But I didn't have shorts, and they put me in these shorts. And I said, I don't want them. I don't want to be put in them, And they said, no, you have to have them. It's part of what you have to have. And they put me in shorts, and I think I was upset and cried because I didn't want to be put in these shorts. But the thing that was going around my head was that I wanted to see the sea.
And you're 5 odd. How old are you at this time? 6 years old.
6
years old.
6.5, round about then. The worst part about it is a lot of my files from the early ages have been redacted, lost, stolen, almost biblical. Floods, famine, fire, whatever you want to call it. They just sort of disappeared, or they went missing, or conveniently
unfortunately.
went missing. Fortunately for certain people and those that you try to get any truth out of. But they had a day book in the houses. So they used to put a record in the houses.
Right.
Now, I'll come to that in a bit. Their day book. But I was taken down, and I was taken down by a member of staff to the bottom of Avenue, and then you had the primary school on the right side, just past the offices. Then you had, I can't remember the first cottage's name, but the next one was Laburnum. And I remember seeing this like yellow tree outside, which was a laburnum tree. Hence, all the houses were named after trees. The avenues were lined by beech trees, hence called Beech Home.
Yep.
So you had the whole avenue, quite big. And so you had your 24 houses, basically about 12 down one end and 12 up the other end, or whatever it was, to fit them in. And I went into this house called Laburnum, and I was taken in there, yellow front door, and I walked in, and there's this woman. And if I said this woman, Grace Robinson, was the splitting image of Hilda Ogden.
Okay, yeah.
Right, from Coronation Street. She had rollers in her hair.
Some of
she
our
had
older
a
viewers
guinea
will,
on,
yeah.
And it sounds crazy. And then there was this big, large woman, a Welsh woman, Audrey Wilson. Now, I remember their names because they were both abusers to me. And it was virtually abuse from the very, very first day that I went there. I'm looking for the seaside, but I'm forced into these routines where I've got to go through this protocol of being vetted and going through the process of eventually I did get let outside, but I was being processed. But this she was looking down at this child, Grace Robinson, looking down at me, trying to weigh me up, and looking down at and Audrey Wilson, this other big woman, who just stood there. It was quite intimidating, quite scary, and nothing that I'd ever been used to.
And you didn't feel it wasn't a good warm feeling, or like a maternal feeling you might get from two women in
these
a
guys
care
were not real guardians.
Yeah,
they were you're placed basically into harm's way. When you talk about duty of care, that didn't exist, and the things that they did and the punishments they handed out were really, really horrific. And the abuse that children suffered in some of these houses, like John said, some kids got it worse. Some kids got it a lot worse than what I did. But the beatings, the abuse, the sexual, the touching up, the things they used to do to you, they seemed to think it was normal. Kind of like it was like a role. And some of the abuse was systematic. It's almost like it was part of the punishment or part of the process. Like the carbolic soap, there's a saying, they used to wash your mouth out with soap. They used to bath you in these big baths. And even at that age, they'd bath you and they'd touch you up in the bath. And I used to fight, and because I was, I didn't like what they were doing to me.
Were you aware then, Alan? You say as early as day one. So you enter this place. You meet these two women. They you're aware of this process, but you're a young 6-7-year-old kid who just wants to get out to your life's already chaos. You only know chaos.
Yeah. But
you can sense something in this place immediately.
Very, very bad vibe. It was very sort of kind of like haunting because it was a very old place. It was it stemmed back to the 1800s, and it was a workhouse originally for poor children from Kensington and Chelsea. So they would go there, and in the old days they would come out of the cottages and a brass band would strike up, and they would come out of each houses and join the back of the queue and work up and be marched off to the workhouses. And this rigorous routine that I had. Hence, there is the link to historic child abuse going back to probably the 1800s. And when we talk about child abuse, it's systemic in a lot of children's homes. You'll find as we talk later on that the link, what John's been talking about and what they're talking about with the police, the system in itself, the councils, the politicians, everything that you can label, all under a banner of the Queen. And it just, I find it so frustrating that nobody ever took responsibility. Nobody ever, said sorry for what they did to us. And it was very, very hard to adjust. The reason they put you in shorts, I feel, was that it was easy to slap your legs. Grace Robinson and Audrey Wilson used to grab you by the scruff of your collar, and they'd slap the backs of your legs, and it used to really sting and really hurt, and slap you around the back of the head. and the neck. They used to slap you on the back of the neck. That was quite painful for a child when you used to get beaten like that.
And what qualifies as a slapping offence? What qualifies as a beating? Or is this just run of the mill? This is how you dealt with
it was virtually run of the mill. You only had to look at them in a way or say the wrong thing, and if they didn't like you, you got a whack. And I think it was almost like they got something out of it. This is a horrible thing to say, but these were carers. These were supposed to look after children. They had a duty of care, and they were beating, slapping, abusing children right left and centre. The dormitories, well, when I first went in, I was processed, and then the kids showed me around, basically. And they said to me, whatever you do, don't call her Granny Grace. We all call her Granny Grace because she looks like an old grandmother. You know, she's horrible. And you know, don't call her Granny Grace because she hates that, and she'll beat you for it. So then they're showing me around and showing me we had 4 toilets outside, so we had to use the outside toilets. We weren't allowed to use the inside toilets. We had labels in all our clothes. Every single one of our clothes had Beach Home written into our clothes. A white sticker was sewn into your clothes with red writing of Beach Home in capitals. Your toothbrush had a plaster put on it with your name on it. Your beaker had a plaster with it, your name written on that. Your flannel, your towel, everything had this label. You was labelled. You became part of a label, became part of a property, part of this children's home. And so the kids showed me around. They said, this is what you've got to do. This is the boys' dormitory. You're not allowed to go down here. That's the girls' dormitory. The boys and girls, the boys' dormitories are there. And there was these double bunk beds and single beds in these dormitories. And there was 2 cubicles for kids that were a little bit more mature. Older children could go in the cubicles. And then they showed me outside, and I'm running around, and I'm running to the back, and I say, is that the sea? Is that the sea? Is that the sea over there? And they're saying to me, no, you know, we're near the sea. You know, sort of like you're 60 miles away from the sea. It's like landlocked. You know, that's what I learned. I mean, you know, they probably didn't say it in them terms as children, but that's what it was. And then the railway ran the back of us. And all I could see in the distance was a bit of a mist, and I thought the sea was the mist, but it was Ewell College or something like that. And that's all I could see. And this is the start of the nightmare. And then we had to sit around these round tables in the dining room and these wooden chairs, very, very hard to sit on, very, very not made for comfort. And I remember looking out of the window, and I saw my sister walking up the avenue. So I ran out of the house, and I ran up to my sister, and I grabbed hold of my sister. I said, Mummy, take me out of here, take me out of here. It's horrible. You know, and I wanted to be with my sister because that's all I knew is my main person in my life. And Granny Grace came out and said, you know, get back in this house now, boy. Really, really, if you saw something out of Oliver and the child, you know, thieving and all that, and the stuff that went on, and the kind of manner, or the disciplined type of tone, get back in this house now, boy. And I suggest you get back to your house, send my sister, where you belong, you know. And she wouldn't let anybody, she wouldn't let your family come into the house or nothing. You weren't allowed into other houses. It was a very, very strict routine and very bullying. And I remember the thing they used to do to you is they used to bath you. I had a thing about baths, and John was talking about something like that earlier on. Bath is like a sacrilege. It's like some sort of medieval type of discipline. You know, they used to put you in these baths and do things to you. But one of the things they used to do, they used to have these floor scrubbing brushes where they used to scrub the floor. Yeah. And there was this stuff, the red soap they used to use called carbolic soap. And they used to use this red carbolic soap to wash the floors and scrub the floors. But when somebody said to you, you know, in the old days, wash your mouth out with soap, they would do. I used to wash my mouth out with carbolic soap. And I used to put it in my mouth, in my eyes, scrub my back with this floor scrubbing brush, almost till I bled. I was red raw, and the stinging from this carbolic soap and they was touching you up while he was in the bath and doing things to you. I don't know what I was doing. I was just trying to fight them off, and there was more water outside the bath. And then what I tried to do is I tried to learn, because with the toothbrush, it was like a coach lock that was on the door. And so what I tried to do is put the toothbrush through the peg type thing, so it stopped the latch from going up and lock the door. But then they'd come through the bathroom window, and they would force their way into the bathroom or get you to go to the door naked, dripping wet, open the door, and then they'd come in and then they'd beat you senselessly, slap you all over the place. And your bare skin, you was being beaten all over the place. You know, you're slapped on the back, you slapped on the backside, you slapped around the legs. You're getting really, you know, black and blue. And I remember in a dormitory, because the trees were lined by beech trees, you used to look up at the ceiling at night, and the street lights used to make the lights, the leaves flicker on the ceiling, and it was almost like they cast these shadows, you know, and they had like this dancing pattern on the ceiling. And I was in bed one night and I was looking at this dancing pattern, and this whole thing became black, and it was completely blacked out by this silhouette of this big shadow of a woman, a large woman. And it was Audrey Wilson, and what she was doing, she was putting her hands in the bed and touching me up in the bed, and touching me and feeling my private parts. And I didn't know what was going on, and never liked that. So I was so petrified, I curled into a little ball, and I pissed the bed. I never wet the bed. All the time I was at home with my brothers and sisters, sleeping in a double bed. And I just curled up into a pool, and I stayed there till morning light, you know, under the window, just so frightened. And they came in at 7 o'clock. They'd get you up at 7 o'clock every single morning without fail, like a military exercise, a routine. And she said, "You dirty, disgusting boy," and give me a beating, dragged me out of the bed, told me to bring my sheets and put it back. Again, we come back to the bath, and they made you wash the sheets in cold water in the bath, and you had to wash the sheets out. I didn't mean to wet the bed because I didn't know I was going to be physically abused. And then I washed the sheets out, and then they made me get into the cold bath if that wasn't more punishment. And the general things they used to do to you, if you didn't eat your food, it was given to you the next day until you ate it. You know, if you refused the food, they would put it before you the next day until you ate it. And an incident happened to me when I was in Laburnum, where they gave this, I could smell this thing one day, and I thought, what the hell's that? You know? And it was called haddock, supposed to be smoked haddock or whatever it was, done in milk, cooked in milk sauce or something. It smelled and looked disgusting. And it was just a piece of fish, this like yellow fish. So I picked it, and I didn't like it at all. And they forced me to eat it over a couple of days. And I got a bone wedged in my throat because one of the parents sat with me till I ate it. House parents. And we had to call them auntie and uncle. We weren't allowed to call them anything else but auntie. The females we had to call aunties, and the male staff we had to call uncle. The dark. Admin staff and the superintendent and the deputy we used to call Mr. Banner, Mr. Dicker, Mr. Bruce, or whatever the case might have been. But the house parents, they were all named auntie. We had to call them auntie or uncle. They weren't any relation to you. They weren't any guardian to you at all. They weren't even carers for the beatings they used to do to you. And then sometimes they would randomly, if you were speaking at the table and if they thought you were speaking out of turn, or they would say, "Merrick, get up, face the wall." And you'd make you stand facing the wall, and you'd staring at the wallpaper, this horrible wallpaper. I can't even remember, I could draw it. That's how staring at it. Fixed this wallpaper, and they used to let you stand there for hours and hours and hours on end until you was virtually dropping, and everything would happen around you. The tables would be cleared, the washing up and all that, but they would make you do the washing up and clearing away, and they give you duties. They used to give you your medication. You used to have to queue up in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning down the corridor, and they had this big kitchen table, and they used to get this big spoonful of malt and shove it in your mouth. And I didn't want to do it. So you'd get beaten and slapped for anything, the slightest thing they could do, you've got to whack. And used to whack you around the legs, and it really used to sting, really stung hard. And the bathroom, when they used to scrub you with the floor, you was in pain and sore for days and days afterwards. And you couldn't tell anybody because we were told little boys like you are seen and not heard. You know, you can't say anything. In them days, you could not speak.
What about with other kids? You and the other kids?
You didn't talk about it because even as children, you daren't say anything in case one of them grassed you up.
So you're all aware that this is happening to each other?
Yes.
You're not thinking, this is just me. Yeah, you know that, you know, little Billy's just come in and you know what he's just been through. You know it. You're laid in your bed and you just can't.
What happened, a way out of it for the kids was, when I was being abused in the dormitories and other kids were being abused, the kids used to turn in their bed and face the wall. So the backs of them were facing the wall and they would face line the wall, so they weren't facing you or looking towards you. Every kid, for some reason, would face that way instead of looking at you or the staff members.
Just trying to put some kind of barrier between the truth.
And they used to, it used to be horrific that what they were doing to you and the things they got up to. From there I went to a house called Larch after I went from Laburnum into Larch, and there was a male member of staff, we used to call him Uncle Ian. And Uncle Ian was very, very abusive.
It's so fucking sinister they've got you calling him auntie.
He used to whack you with his fist and beat you up as a child. He used to put me on the floor and he used to lie on top of me, rubbing his bollocks into my back. And then when they used to make you wash up at tea times and all that, he'd come up behind you and put you in a strangle lock. And he was so powerful, so strong, I couldn't do anything about it. He was too powerful, too strong for me. He was like a rugby player, built like a rugby player. And he'd hold you and he'd be rubbing up against you at the sink. You couldn't move because he'd locked you in this position.
Of course, he's a great, big, strong man. You're a kid.
And when I was lying on the floor, I couldn't do it. I couldn't fight him off. He was so powerful. And one day he hit me with his fist and he lifted me off the ground and punched me into the next room, into the dining room. And I remember picking up the coal scullery cellars thing, whatever you call it, the condiments that you use for the fire.
Right.
And I threw them at him in a rage temper, and I started to fight back and learn to fight back. And I remember running away 3 times from Beach Home, and the furthest I got was a place called Tooting.
Yeah.
And I walked all the way up the Banstead Road, past Rose Hill, Mitcham, Sutton, and Tooting. And then when I got to Tooting as a young lad, it was quite a long distance walking across Banstead Downs. And it was starting to piss down with rain then. And I thought, I'm going to get wet through. And I didn't know whether to turn myself into Tooting Police Station and tell the police, or I thought I'd been in more trouble because I'd done this before. I'd gone to Banstead Police Station and said to them, look, I'm being abused in Beach Home. And what they did is they took me back in a Black Maria, back to Beach Home, and I went before the superintendent, Jeffrey Banner, who sat me on his knee and bounced me off his knee and said, little boys like you, get the cane. And he pointed to the cane in the corner. And he was doing this in a perverse way. He was getting off of bouncing me off his knee, and I positioned you in a place that he was sitting on his lap. And this is the guy who was the superintendent of Beach Home. And we used to have girls in there. There was a couple of girls that must have been the most cane girls in Beach Home. Maura Lohman and Sue Peake. Sue Peake is a campaigner with me today. And the punishments they dished out to her, the horrific abuse that he did to her in Beach Home. And she saw my sister Margie, my mistress sister, getting abused by Mr. Gray. I don't know why they called him Mr. Gray, not Uncle Gray or whatever it was. But his wife and him used to be abused as children, and my sister was being abused in that house. Sue saw them abusing another child there. She tried to stop the abuse and threatened she would go to tell somebody about it. And what they did with Sue in the end is disgraceful. At age 14, they put Sue, for speaking out about the abuse that was happening to Beach Home, into a mental institution.
Sectioned her.
And they sectioned her at 14 years of age. And you find that they sometimes used to do this where they used to build police stations. They used to build courthouses next to the police stations. This is part of the system where we talk about the system and the corrupt system, what it is today and how it manufactures. And then where you had the police station, you had the courthouse. Where you had the children's homes, you inevitably had a mental institution
next door
near a children's home. So if you wanted to place children or hide people or children went to go missing, there were angles and routes out of it. I mean, I saw children go from Beechholm in, now we talked about the BBC. Jimmy Savile used to have a thing called Sunshine Coaches, and the Sunshine Coaches used to come into Beechholm, and these children used to go into these coaches and would never see them again. They'd disappear completely. And there was talk of some children going taken to the Elms Guest House in Barnes, Southwest 13, and other places like that. Dolphin Square, children were taken to Dolphin Square in Southwest London, or just near Pimlico, going towards Westminster, and I think there was something like 1,000 flats in the Dolphin Square, and 100 of them were used by politicians. And kids were being waterboarded in there, and all sorts of things were happening, and they were being taken from children's homes. And some kids were being taken from Beechholm to Dolphin Square and Barnes. I never got taken to them, but I knew about them. But that comes back in later years, because a lot of the stuff that happened, I found out about cabin in London. And I learnt about the Barnes, the Elms Guest House in Barnes, and I learnt about Dolphin Square. And the security just used to wave you on. There's a phone call made. You weren't stopped or anything. You know, if it was a politician or someone like that, and I've driven a few people about, you know, from
as a cabbie in London. Yeah.
It wasn't a black cabbie. It was like a minicab driver.
Yeah.
But you worked for it was a good company. And they were probably one of the biggest companies in London now. On the Fulham Road, on the junction of Fulham Road and Fulham Palace Road, you've got Atlas Cars.
Right.
Now, they're all over London. They used to have telephone numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy numbers to remember. But they used to have Kensington, Chelsea, all them areas, the West End, a lot of celebrities, a lot of well-known people, pop stars, Hans Zimmer, people like that who makes music, and all the people that you could name. Well-to-do, Michael Standing, people like that, Koo Stark. I've driven Koo Stark when she was seeing Andrew. So there's more to that to come. I'll come in a bit, would concentrate a bit more on Beechholm. And the punishments were so bad in Beechholm. And Ian McLaren used to beat the fucking living daylights out of you. He used to beat, and he was bathing children at 12 years of age. And while I was in Laburnum, I used to go to the Beechholm Primary School. And I used to go in shorts, and then we had these brown jumpers, this brown and yellow tie, and we'd go there, and I was beaten constantly by Mr. Margates, who was my teacher. He'd come and hit you across the knuckles with a wooden ruler, and the fucking thing about slapping you around the head, they'd come round and just give you a whack round the back of the head or a slap round the ear roll for no reason at all. I never learned anything in there. I never learned one thing when I was in the primary school. I couldn't read and write.
Well, how can you even get into any...
We see this quite a bit. The consistency with this is the lack of education. You know, bear in mind a lot of young offenders are illiterate, high illiteracy rate, especially back in them days because they couldn't sleep, because they were abused, so they couldn't concentrate. The beatings are very consistent with the people I've spoken to. I mean, there was one guy, he was in a very similar home. I can't remember, it was in Essex. And from the age of 6 till 15, the girls and boys were separated, and every evening they were taken into the main hall. This is where you see women abusing on a more predominant level than men. And what the women's abuse is very calculated and very spiteful. And there's a clear difference. You know, men's is brutal, the women's are very spiteful. And they would line them up. The girls had to all line up, all young, from very infant to pubescent girls were made to line up, but the boys had to then, were all paraded in naked, from 6 till 15, and the head teacher would whack them, bend them over and whack them every single night with like a wooden hairbrush, naked on their buttocks while the girls watched. So you've got boys with fully grown penises, pubic hair, and the girls, and that they humiliated them every single day. There was one case in a home called Shirley Oaks where one guy told me he was his sister was he was a bit older. His sister was about 3 years old. She was crying for their mum, and the staff pinned her down, and they killed her. So what they did was they brought in his other sister, who was a couple of years older than the little girl who died, and they put her next to him and called the police and said that she had killed her own sister.
Oh my fucking God.
So we are seeing this consistently, and what Alan has said brings me on to a point about Dolphin Square. Dolphin Square has featured in the press and in the government inquiry. It is a residential home for politicians. A police officer got in touch with me, and he was based at Rochester Road Police Station, which is a jurisdiction for Dolphin Square, which is in SW1 Pimlico. And the superintendent brought all the patrol officers in from the area, and they turned around and said anyone caught stopping a car going in and out of Dolphin Square will be disciplined and could lose their job. So the police were deliberately stopping any sort of interaction with runaway kids.
With that.
Yep.
And is that, to this day, is that going on in Dolphin Square?
I don't know. But if you look at the video by Culture Club,
Yeah.
right, the song "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me."
Right.
Now listen to the lyrics. "Do you really want to hurt me?"
Right.
It's filmed in Dolphin Square Gymnasium, where a lot of abuse was said to have gone on.
So
Boarding was rife in Dolphin Square,
right.
where they used to put the children under the water, and that's come out time and time again. Where the part of the punishment was where they used to waterboard them, and the things they used to do. You know, it's like when I was in the primary school with Mr. Margate, my class teacher used to beat you and hit you. And there was a guy also who went to Shirley Oaks called Mr. Whiteman. He was the school teacher, and you was a little boy, you was a child, and you had these shorts on. You had no possessions, you had nothing. He'd rifle through your pockets of your shorts and say to him, "What you got in your pockets, boy?" He was touching you up. He was putting his hands deep into your pockets and just basically feeling you and touching you. And you said, "Nothing, sir, nothing, sir." And he'd pin you against the wall while he was rifling. He did that all the time. But the worst part about it, he did it in front of all the other children. He did it in front of all the other staff. And nobody ever said a word. And he got convicted of paedophilia in Shirley Oaks. He went from Beechhome. When they talk about paedophile rings and they talk about the coincidences of one place to another places and about what happens here, there and everywhere, and like John's named various places, you know, there are guys that I know to this day that are in Kencor. Is it Kencor? Kincora in Belfast. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
There's two kids' homes. There was Kincora, which was a Protestant faith-run home, and Kirkcorbin, which was Catholic. You know, there's two twin brothers were based in Kirkcorbin, run by the Catholic Brotherhood, the De La Salle Brotherhood, and what they were doing, because they were twins, their first day there they were anally raped. The priests made other boys rape them, and they were taken to parties and they were made to have sex with each other while the priests sat around and masturbated. And we're getting this time and time again. Now, what we got to look at is, how does this go on, and why does it go on? So it's okay looking at this a problem, but what we got to look is, why is a problem allowed to perpetuate and go on unabated? So let's go through our politicians. Now, I got invited with Alan to go into one of the parliamentary buildings to speak to a politician who they always promise the world, these people, and deliver nothing.
Want your vote, don't they?
Yeah. Now let's look. We go on. There was a group called the Paedophile Information Exchange, right, which was formulated in the late 60s through to 70s, and it was a pro-paedophile lobbyist group. They wanted the age of consent reduced to 4 years old. Pro-paedophile, right? And And when they actually intercepted it, it was monitored by Special Branch. It was actually funded for 5 years by the Metropolitan Police's Special Branch. And their excuse was, at least we know who's in it, you know. But at no point did they interact. But this group was made up of you know, pederasts, you know, people that want sex with predominantly young boys. You know, there was an army colonel in there, the head of the boys' brigade, people from the clergy, police officers, right? They were allowed to talk at the Labour Party's, no, it wasn't. It was the Campaign for Civil Liberties, which is now a group called Liberty, a campaigning group called Liberty, with that Shami Chakrabarti in there. Before, it was run by Harriet Harman, Margaret Hodge and Patricia Hewitt. They allowed, this Civil Liberties group, allowed Pi to give a talk at their National Christmas Conference at the London School of Economics. You know, each one of them politicians, Hewitt, Hodge and the other one, I forget now, they're all right honourables now. Right, they're all right honourables. One of them was appointed by Tony Blair as Minister for Safeguarding Children.
Oh my
right.
God!
Now we've got to look at people like Tony Blair, David Cameron, Margaret Thatcher. They all have PAs. They're not personal assistants. They're political advisors.
Yep.
5 of the most recent prime ministers have had political advisors that have been paedophiles. Right. The head of military intelligence, Sir Peter Heyman, was a paedophile. Right, so this is how we get this. It is ingrained. We have had Home Secretaries. There was a Home Secretary called Leon Britton. Right, the youngest ever promoted Home Secretary. Right, the allegations have been set out against this man time and time again. Indecency with young boys. He was given a file containing abuse and satanic abuse against children, and he lost it. You know, we are constantly seeing the same pattern emerging and re-emerging and re-emerging, and nothing is ever done about it. And failings in policing, and these care homes are money making, and the abuse is exactly the same throughout all these care homes. There's the Medhamsley, the Kincora, you know, all of these, right? And the thing where the kids were taken and trafficked to Dolphin Square. Intelligence services have been monitoring this as well. And how do they allow it? Because there's blackmail value in it. Because people can be blackmailed for having sex with children. And when the victims and survivors come forward, what happens is that they are then subject to ridicule. Right? They then have to make an allegation and stand before a court with the highest burden of proof in the world, beyond all reasonable doubt. Only 2% of historic child sexual abuse cases go to fruition, to conviction, 2%. So that's not saying 98% of them are liars, whereas the law now sets it out that they are, infers that they are, because they brought in 2003, the Criminal Justice Act, bad character provisions, right? So if you have been sexually abused, you may well self-medicate, and you'll self-medicate by alcohol and or narcotics. The drug of choice for self-medication is heroin because it's an analgesic. It is a painkiller. And pain takes many forms, as we all know. And, of course, it will mar this, right? Now, at some point, your savings aren't going to continue to fund your addiction, so you go to crime. And the crime of choice is shoplifting, and inevitably you're going to get caught. So you're now a person of dishonesty. So at some point in your life, when you get this road to Damascus and you sit there and think, I want to change my life. I want to get rid of this pain. And healing comes with a sense of justice, right? Now, people come forward, and when they do have the government inquiries, it encourages things like the Truth Project, encourage people to come forward. They come forward and they're attacked. And we have seen survivors go to prison for speaking out. They have just launched another inquiry, the government. They've not made it public, but I'm making it public. And they're looking at 2 survivors of abuse and trying to attack them because they've spoken out. Right? Now, we'll wait and see what happens on that. But this is what they're doing time and time and time again.
So what does your work leave you at in the way of... It can only be to me, it seems like to me, guys, that principally the people who make the big decisions in how things are run are involved. That's it. It must be.
Well, what we've got to look at, like I said, crime is usually the reserve of the lower and working classes. Paedophilia is across the board.
Yeah.
Now, what we did was we did something that the criminal justice system never been able to do. We unified. We got together, right? And we formed a tight group, and we formed a working group. So there's me as an ex-copper, there's Alan as an ex-resident, there's Sue, there's Jean, and then we started getting people coming forward. So then we had a group called the SAS, the Sikh Awareness Society. They're Sikhs, and they actually campaign for survivors of abuse, and they assist survivors of abuse. They actually go and save trafficked people proactively. Mm-hmm. They said, well, we're with you, right? We then started getting members of notorious biker gangs saying, well, we're with you. We then got phenomenal support from veterans.
Okay, yeah.
Right, incredible. We got contacted by members of the Special Forces. I got contacted recently by members of Special Forces who've been abused. And if we look at a recent documentary that went out about the SAS, and you've got people like Andy McNabb had been from the care system. I think out of the 5 soldiers, 4 had come from the care system.
Okay.
So, you know, so we started getting this huge following. And to say it's a huge following is an understatement. So we decided as a collective group under the banner of Beach Home Survivors to hold a protest or whatever, you know. And so Sue, she put in for the authority, which was granted, and it was going ahead. And we had something like 20,000 active people saying, right, we're going to do this, marching bands. There were Muslim groups, there was church groups. It was, honestly, Christian groups. We were bringing together this crew. Mm. And it was anyone who'd really lost a child, you know, whether through the care system, through alcoholism, through this. It was for the children. It was a campaign for the children. And then one day I get a call from the Metropolitan Police saying, John, this is Sergeant so-and-so from the Public Order Department. I went, okay. And he said, look, you're working with the Beach Home group and you're doing this protest. I went, yeah. And they went, stand down. I went, I beg your pardon. He went, John, we can't allow it to go ahead. We like you. We respect you. You're an honourable guy. There's a lot of people who still remember you. But if you do it, you're going to get arrested. Right? Because they just brought in the COVID laws, right?
I was going to say, what is the timeline on this? Yeah.
It just come in. And he said, we don't want to arrest you. And they were reasonable about it. They were reasonable. And they said, look, we will facilitate you, but you can't do it at the moment. You know, we want you to carry on, which I thought was a fair argument. So I got in touch with Alan and said, Alan, the police are on the phone. Can we just put a stand down on it? Which it caused a little bit of disharmony, but anyway, people understood. But of course, what we've seen happen now is that the right to protest has pretty much been withdrawn. Yeah. So it will never go ahead. We saw the Epstein thing coming forward, in which Prince Andrew
much has happened, hasn't it?
So what the survivors were saying was coming to fruition. Mm-hmm. But it's dangerous, right? And I got contacted by a former member of MI6 who basically told me, be very, very careful because you're going to start influencing politically. I then got a former member of the SAS wanted to meet me. I went down to Cornwall, sat down with this guy, and he just told me about contract killings and how they work, and said you're very much in line to be a target or something. And that was ratified by a police and crime minister who actually stood in Parliament and said he feared for my safety, because what we were starting to do was bring these truths back. Yeah,
bringing it close.
Yeah. You know, and survivor groups were building and were working together. I'd never seen this before.
So with, obviously in the UK, you just mentioned Epstein, which is linked to the UK massively through the Crown and so on. How much did we know about Savile at the time?
Oh, that's a good point. Can I add something to it?
Yeah.
So, talking about Beach Home, so what happened with me is that I named Audrey Wilson, Grace Robinson, Jeffrey Banner, Mr. Margate, Mr. Whiteman, Peter McTavish was another one who abused me, beat the living shit out of me, he had hands like shovels. Huge guy. He kind of, if I said he was like the guy, I'm trying to think the name. He was in Harry Potter. He was the big guy.
Hagrid.
Hagrid. He was like Hagrid. Huge, and he just looked splitting image like him. He was like a
big hairy
gorilla.
lump, yeah.
And he had hands like shovels. When he hit you, you stayed hit. And they had this ritual, but after he'd given me this beating and kicked the living shit out of me, because Grace had reported me to him and Audrey of being like an abusive child, a very rude, disruptive child. So I had to go before him because he could deal with me. And he said to me, if I didn't be able to, I'll be in his house with all boys, because all the boys would be in that house, or the boys that were a little bit uncontrollable went in his house. And as I was saying to you about this ritual, after he'd given me a beating, he told me to go and get a bath. And they'd freely walk into the bathroom to see what he was doing or what he was up to. And all staff used to do this type of thing, would walk into the children's bathrooms. And it didn't matter what age you seemed to be up to, as John was saying, with developed children as well. And my sisters and that were developed. My sister was 5 years older than me. So, you know, this went on and on and on. And then, because of my education was very, very poor, they tried to put me into outside school, and I was getting beaten up because I had clothes with beach home in him, and they was calling me orphan and this, that, and the other, and I was fighting, or I was getting into scraps, or and nothing would sink in school. I was one of them guys that I'd sit there and I just couldn't take anything in.
Jesus,
I don't know why. I just couldn't take. But they used to make you walk all the way to North Secondary School, which is about 5 miles away, and 5 miles back. Some kids got a pass to go on the bus, but if your face didn't fit, you didn't get it. And I was one of them unfortunate kids that had to walk every day. And then after the fighting, all that, I'll get that out. And then they put me into another school. The same thing happened there. I got into fights, and every kid jumped on me. And I used to get, I think it was a shilling, I think, a sixpence or something like that, as bus fare to go on the 164 bus from Banstead to Rose Hill. Get off at Rose Hill and walk into this school. And they beat me up and stole my money. So I had to walk all the way back from this school, which was probably 20 miles away, back to Beach Home. And I remember walking through Sutton High Street. I don't know why I walked that way. I should have gone the other way. It was, and Grace Robinson, Granny Grace, was standing at a bus stop. And she see me. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, I didn't want to say anything, because I tried to not look at her, because I had a bit of a busted mouth where I'd been in a fight, and my face was slightly red. So I was kind of talking to her like that, as if I was carrying and walking. And I didn't want to tell her too much. And I just tried to hide when I went back to Beach Home and just mingle in with the children. And kind of like, because when we was outside, it was our domain. We could get up to all sorts of things. We could climb the roofs and things like that. We used to go scrumping. We used to throw pears and apples at the cars going up and down Fir Tree Road. And one day I remember us throwing some fruit at a car, and next thing you know, it came into Beach Home, and we scattered everywhere, all over the place. It was a police car and a plainclothes police car we'd hit, and they came in, but they couldn't find any of us because we knew it. We were almost like a guerrilla warfare to them children. But then they placed me into a school in Beach Home called the Orchard. Now, that was for children with learning difficulties, or I was sometimes called a retard. The abuse that you used to give wasn't just physically; it was
of course,
verbally as well.
Mentally,
A retard, and I think on one of my reports it actually says lacking in intelligence or something like that, or whatever the case might have been. The wording is very discriminatory of you as a human being. It's very horrible wording. It was supposed to have been in my reports, and had learning difficulties and so on. So I went to the Orchard, and they did the BBC done a documentary called Gail is Dead. Now, this documentary about one of the Beach Home children, Nancy David was the teacher at the Orchard, tried to help Gail when she left Beach Home, and she got onto drugs and sort like that, and she was found dead in the basement of this flat. And And the poignant things that Gal says in the video when she starts talking, she made up this lyrics of this rhyme, and I can't remember off the top of my head, you know. And if you listen to those words, it's from a disturbed child. You know, if I was a horse, I would bite, or if I was a bee, I'd sting. Things like that to show her. And the BBC interviewed me. What they asked me to do was there's where the wall of the gym was, there's a kind of like memorials painted on the walls. And they gave me a dry brush and they said, paint that as we're interviewing you and talking to you. And they was doing an interview about what had happened to me and how I came there. And I told them about, you know, what happened to me sort of at home. But for some reason, I told my mother about it, and she wrote to the BBC, and, you know, under circumstances, she just said, I don't want this showing. So they did not show that. But the Man Alive series had archive footage of me in Beach Home at the same time they did the Gail is Dead. And if you go on YouTube and look at Gail is Dead, there was 6 programs made, and it shows you Jeffrey Banner, one of the abusers, all the kids, all the houses.
You get that up, Aidan?
Yeah, it's called
Gail
is Dead.
Gail is Dead.
It's on YouTube. And you just have a type Gail is Dead here. And Nancy David, you see all the kids in Beach Home. You see how he was dressed, how they used to dress you.
Is this?
There's pictures of it.
There it is. Look, Gail is Dead.
Yeah, that's where she is. But Jeffrey Banner's the first one. It'd be that one there where Jeffrey Banner. That's the superintendent of Beach Home, Jeffrey Banner, and he was an abuser. He was a very cool. There's Gail there
At the bottom.
and what she said in that interview, it was, you know, if I was this and I was that, and telling her story, it was quite, you know, heart-wrenching. It was quite sad. And, you know, the things you used to get up to, I mean, when I left Beach Home, they put me in a hostel. I went into Ash Cottage, and Gordon Reed was another abuser.
Yeah, I know.
And Gordon Reed, see, like, you can see the kids in shorts, and that's what they used to put you in, those grey shorts and brown tops and everything else like that. And it was horrific what what we went through there. The abuse was, I mean, okay, so I've got 2 sisters, another brother, all abused in the cottages they were in, and I was in 4 cottages. So, and I was in 3 out of 4 cottages out of 24. So if you say with my family alone, how many abusive cottages were there in Beach Home? There's not very many good ones, let's put it that way.
No.
And the abuse was rife, and it stemmed from children being taken away, never to be seen again, to there were reports of children committing suicide. But again, like John has said, it's proving it.
Right.
You know, it's actually proving it, and trying to find proof and you know, factual evidence when you're fighting a system is very, very difficult.
Well, Ken Livingstone ordered the Shirley Oaks home to be levelled.
Right.
And there were reports that children, residents, had found a body of one girl in a tunnel, in a pipe, you know, down there. So, you know, the history dies with it once it's gone. You know, and if they was to pay out for all the damage and destruction, they'd go bankrupt. But what we got to look at society in general, you know, from cradle to grave, you know, children from dysfunctional homes make a lot of money, right? So, you know, you take a kid, it goes into the care system, and that's when people start earning.
Funded and...
Yeah, but not only that, we've got to look at the legal process, you know? How much is keep someone in a prison? You know, how much for a methadone thing? And also, one of the biggest scandals is how much they pay for solicitors and barristers. You know, £450 an hour they'll pay.
It's ridiculous.
You know, and they happily pay it, bang, bang, bang. But yet they've never got any money for treatment. All of this, our society's ills. I'm no expert, but the one thing is I'm not a fool. It all stems back to child abuse, but there is no funding in it. There's no impetus to investigate it. When it comes to the police, it's very, very poorly supervised, very overworked.
If you go to the beginning of that picture where you got Jeffrey Banner at the beginning of the video for Gail is Dead, and it shows a picture of Jeffrey Banner. See that cottage? Oh, if you can freeze that where Jeffrey Banner is, if you can go back to where Jeffrey Banner was,
there he is,
there,
isn't
there, that. If you can freeze that, you can freeze that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. See the cottage behind there?
Yeah.
See where the tree is there? To the right-hand window, not that window there, the next one over. No, to the right. Keep going to the right. That one there, yeah. That was where my bedroom was, where I was abused by Audrey Wilson. That is the actual house, Laburnum.
What's that like for you seeing that now, Alan?
Haunting, because there's the trees, there's the beech trees, there's the line of the beech trees as you're looking down Beach Home. There's the cottages you can see. They all sort of like the kitchen windows all faced inwards towards each other, as if like each house would be turned to face each other, and you could, you know,
See it in people's eyes.
yeah, and that's where he was the one that bounced me off his knee.
Right.
And said to me, you were heading for the cane, and threatened me with Stanford House and places like that. Similar to what they did to Sue and put her in Epsom Mental Institution for speaking out about the abuse that was
there
going
was one care home, there was 19 known paedophiles working there. 19.
Known?
9 paedophiles convicted, 19, yeah. You know, it's we hear the same story time and time and time
So,
again.
coming back to like the Savile and the Epstein and where we are now, and you guys campaigning, the group you've put together, the awareness you're raising, do you feel like the Savile breakthrough and now with the Epstein thing, is this helping? Is this shedding light? Is this lifting the lid a bit?
Yeah. I mean, years ago, what was incredulous is now accepted as fact.
Yeah.
yeah.
How many people have watched Jim will fix it and been screaming at the television and then gone on a mad drinking bender for hours? You know, the police failed to investigate, but now they're right. So what we're looking at now, these attempts by people like Panorama to denigrate survivors, you know, these inquiries by the Metropolitan Police to attack people coming forward, we need to see them for what they are. You know, this is Operation Stable Door, as we used to call it in the police.
And Savile went to Beach Home.
You did?
Yeah, he went in 1972 to Beach Home. Jimmy Savile went to Beach Home in 1972 as I was leaving Beach Home. The church that was in Beach Home was burnt down in 1968 when I was in Ash, and Gordon Reed was the house parent of that house when I was getting beaten by him. He another one, he used to use his fists, and I knocked one of the kids' teeth out. You know, the damage they used to do. I think he actually ended up losing his job.
Right.
So something must have happened. But he used to beat a lot of kids up. But we were sort of getting towards teenagers then and getting a little bit older. And he hit me one day as I was walking past and punched me straight in the head. And I just turned and laughed at him. And he said, "What are you laughing for?" And I said, "You can't hurt me anymore." I'd been hit so many times and so many abuse, so much of it over the years. I just said to you, "You can't hurt me anymore." And whereas I'd cried before and been floods of tears in Laburnum, by now I was laughing. That makes me probably a weirdo.
Did it make you want to be violent yourself, Alan? Yeah.
Well, what happened was then, by the time I got to Beach, I became a bully in myself.
Of course.
Because,
that's what you know.
And I don't know if it's because, I don't know if you can use it in the terms of abusive bully. In one sense, it is abuse, because the older children in Beach Home would make you fight the younger children. If you didn't hit them, they would hit you. So they'd make you have fights. You'd have to have fights with them. And if you didn't do that, you know, they would beat you up. So you'd get beaten. And I used to hate that. And it haunts me to this day, because some of the guys that I used to fight with, I know are still alive today. And one guy in particular, I know he's still alive. And I've spoken to him, and he's been out with me, and John's met him. But I still feel that guilt to this day, that I was made to do that. But I can't turn around and say to him, "Look, I'm sorry for what I did to you, but what can I do? If I didn't fight you, he would beat me up. He was stronger than me. I might have been stronger than you."
That's the chain.
And that's the chain, yeah. And what they did from Ash, they put me into, I went out of age. I was working for a little bit in Beach Home. At Kinloch, getting my job at Kinloch Provision Merchants, and I was going out on a little bit of money. But I'd done some strange and weird things while I was in Beach Home, and it's hard to explain. They allowed me to go home at weekends to go, because I loved Chelsea, and I used to love going and watch Chelsea Football Club, and I used to go from Banstead to Victoria number 11 bus, And when we lived at Becklow Gardens, I used to go to Becklow Gardens in Shepherd's Bush. And I used to still have contact with me mum, but my dad died when I was 10 years of age in Beecham. And never did see him again. My brothers and sisters, we've never ever shared the same room, like this room here. We've never been in one room together, the four of us, ever in life.
Since you got taken to that place?
Sorry?
Since you first got taken into care, you've never all been in a room together since?
Never.
And have you managed to speak to them and
well,
take their accounts of each other in?
My brother, Beecham, mentally affected Frank. I think we're all suffering a little bit of a mental subconsciousness of what happened to us, if you want to put it in that term. I'm not the full ticket. Definitely not. You know, the light's on, but I'm not always at home. If that makes sense.
How can anybody be? How can anybody be? You're developing all of your, you know, when you're that age, you know, you're literally developing your whole your circuitry of being.
I've spoken to people that have been made to have sex with their own sister and their own brother, you know, and they said, you know, what? There was one guy told me this horrific story that he was taken to a party, and I think he might have been taken from Beecham to a party as a young kid, and his sister, his twin sister, was there, and another girl, and they said, if you don't have sex with that girl, we're going to rape your sister. And he said, I feel guilty. I said, what are you guilty about? He said, well, I should have not done it because my sister had been raped so many times. What would it matter to her?
Oh my fucking!
I know when you can't think like that, you were a kid. But this guy went on to a life of incredible violence. So when we look at violent people, aren't we missing a trick here? And who are these people? There's one guy. I'll try and put you in touch with him. He's a really lovely fella, and when he was released from the care home, he was horrifically abused. He was threatened by his probation officer, and his probation officer was raping him when he was in care. And even the Crown Court judge who sentenced him was one of the attendees at this boys' home that was raping these boys. So this is how deep this goes. You know, if the truth ever came out, it was like this senior officer said to me, "You have no idea how deep this goes." He knew what I was heading into. He knew what I was uncovering, and he did that. And, you know, and shame on him. And the government have protected him, and they protected Cressida Dick, you know, in several cases, and they have. And these people know what goes on.
So if Maxwell, if this case with Maxwell now, I mean, how far away were we from Prince Andrew being?
Well, he is. I mean, what he's done,
pulled in, and
well, he will never be pulled in.
No,
it won't happen. But he clearly is, or clearly has committed acts of paedophilia. You know, why are they not pulling him in? You know, but if you don't pay your poll tax or your congestion charge, you know, you're back before a court. This system is. People need. They need to start taking an interest in what we're doing. You know, they do. They need to start giving us the bigger platform so we can tell society what really is going on, how deep this is and how dangerous and destructive this is. And only then, but people have cognitive dissonance. They switch off. They don't talk about it, you know? I mean, we meet up socially and okay, yeah, we do talk about it, but then we'll talk about other things. But when you sit there and have a normal chat, people will put, no, don't hear this, don't hear this, don't hear this. Yeah, they'll talk about crap on the telly, the Kardashians or football or whatever. And you think, my God, really?
This is what's so frustrating for me right now with everything that's going on, with all this talk and all this. The government want to look after us and make sure we're all okay and protect us. And, you know, just all we need is these wonderful chemicals that we've made for you to keep you safe. And when you are privy to even just you know, I mean, you guys have taken me and I'm sure Aidan into deep water today with the levels. You know, I've always assumed, and that word conspiracy, which again is being bandied about a lot at the moment, seems very convenient to just kind of parcel everything into that tinfoil hat over there. I think lots of us do know, as you mentioned there, John, you allude to people, oh, I don't want to hear this bit, you know, I kind of know, I don't need to know, I know enough.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah, well said.
We don't know the half of it, and we've not even gone near satanic ritual abuse.
No.
I mean, Ted Heath was outed as a Satanist. The chief constable, Mike Veal, that was investigating Ted Heath, he's come to us and said, look, they're destroying me. What do I do? He's the chief constable, because the intelligence services were out to crush him because he was exposing the former prime minister for being a child rapist and an active Satanist. You know, and in Satanism, kids die. Children are killed, sacrifices are made. And I'm now working with a team where I'm getting information about voodoo, the abuse that goes on within the black communities and the South American communities. And it's rife one way or the other. It doesn't matter, you know, whether you knowingly worship the devil or a voodoo deity, or you're just a rapist to children. You're doing the devil's work and you're destroying lives. Well, and it needs to stop. And, you know, if it's uncomfortable, we'll think about what the poor victims have to go through. You not think that they go through discomfort. But, you know, I'd like to say, because I'll have to shoot soon, but I'd just like to say that, you know, we are, I'll step back a lot, but Beecham, you know, you're out there, Al, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm out there all the time. But can I just say a quick thing as well? Because, you know, what they do to you as a child, what happens to a child, right? I later in life saw a psychiatrist, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with you." He said, "The only thing that's wrong with you is that you've got a memory, and your memory will never ever. That's the only part of you will never ever let you forget." And what they did with me in Beecham is they put me in a hostel in London to get rid of me. And once I became 18, they kicked me out of the hostel. I had nowhere to go. The council didn't want to know me. I was sleeping rough on the streets of London, outside Cobbs Hall and Hammersmith and Fulham, my birth borough, trying to get a place or a flat to live. I was sofa surfing where I could, and I was getting food from soup kitchens, and I was living in parks and on benches, and in between trying to do what I could, where I was giving a little bit of money here and there, and walking all over London. I live north, south, east and west of London, trying to survive, and it got to the stage where I turned to drink, and I was very, very bad in drink, and I'd done some stupid things in drink. For a place to stay, I put a brick through a window on a Friday, because if I put a brick through a window on a Friday, I won't go to court till Monday.
So you get your nice.
So I've got Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night with a hot meal and a bed, and I wasn't in the rain and wet and getting cold and that. And I'd done some stupid things in my time, and I went off the rails, big style. I went off the rails, and I went into every single prison in London. I was in Wormwood Scrubs, I was in Brixton, I was in Wandsworth, I was in the Scrubs, Pentonville. And when I went into Wandsworth, it was really, really strict, because in them days, you had cold showers. You didn't have radios, and you didn't have the luxuries like they've got today. That was serious bird. And that's when but to me, I kind of was institutionalised with the system.
Of course, yeah.
That what I went through,
yeah.
People looking up to authority. But in life, when I've gone on to work, I hate people speaking at me. I like people to speak to me and not at me. I hate that. I have rejected that. Frank went out to take his aggression and do karate. He went on to be a black belt 8th Dan, and he fought in a British Championship and a European Championship. Yeah. Frank, with anybody, hate authority. He'd sooner punch you in the face and shake hands with you. That's how it affected him. But really, the thing that affected a lot of people, the mental illness that affects children. You take the best part of a child's life away from them, and it affects them forever. And I still, to this day, the police have interviewed me in my 60s and asked me to bring everything back that I've done. It came and phoned me out of the blue and said to me, "We've had a phone call that you was in an abusive children's home called Beecham. Would you be prepared to talk to us?" Somebody's walked into the police station and said they was abusing Beecham, and your name, Alan Merritt, was mentioned. Can we come up and interview you? I'm in my 60s. My first 25 years of life, through Beecham, through all them other children's homes, through hostels, through going in prisons, through, walking the streets, and just being like...
lost.
Lost. A very, very lost soul. Very, very lost soul. Not educated, very, very poor educated. I weren't likely to get a good job. My prospects weren't looking good. I got myself into some stupid trouble and some silly things. I went off the rails a bit. And when I met my wife in my 30s, she used to calm me down. I used to have nightmares and jump out of bed fighting in the room at these shadows that I saw dancing on the ceiling because they were coming back.
God.
And my wife calmed me down and settled me down. And I met a Lincolnshire girl and she calmed me down something. If I hadn't met her, I would have died.
Love.
And
You got love.
I would have
You
been
found love.
in a doorway somewhere or probably dead by now.
You know, this podcast that I do, and today we have taken it to the deepest levels we've ever been in regards to this message, which is children. We take it for granted. So it's such a hidden in plain sight thing to care for children, to guide children, to create a safe, secure, loving environment for children. And we just take that for granted. And if they do not get that, even on a simple level, like I've spoken about my own story in a broken marriage where there's nasty politics and there's difficult things and there's a bit of corporal punishment, it's not even close to what you've talked about today. But even that distorts the self-value, the security of a child, the confidence, the belief, the ability to be loved and to give love as we move further into life.
Another thing you said about love is when you meet other women, when you start to get older and you get involved in relationships. Now, I never knew what love and affection was. Any woman that showed me any love or affection, I used to lap it up. I used to melt, like I used to be butter in their hands. I used to melt. And I used to be so stupid in relationships because it was something I never had any love. I never had any affection. I didn't know what it was like. To be loved, to be cuddled and to be held was to be adored. It was so beautiful. I didn't know what that was. And I had nightmares in my 30s and my wife kept calming me down. And then when I was 64, the police come to me and said to me, "Can we interview you?" They took me before Skeggy police station, and Skeggy's got like a rape suite, and they got cameras in the walls, and they interviewed me, and two of the abusers from my days are still alive, and they didn't even go and interview them. They said the only thing we could do with them is probably hold a charge of actual bodily harm because of time spent. And that's all we could do. So it's not worth actually interviewing them people. And it's your word against theirs. And in the end, they said, your case has been concluded. And I take that police officer and I've got him on tape, which he didn't expect, letting out some things. And it's part of why I've campaigned for so long, because the corruption is at a level that none of us ever would even dream of.
Obscene. Well, listen, boys, you are doing the only thing that you can do, which is fight for truth, fight for honour, fight for the fucking right to have a human right, and to try as best you possibly can to just bring a light onto this situation that kids to this very day are going through. And I really appreciate that. And I'd like, if we can, John and Alan, if you're up for it, you mentioned we haven't even got into the next levels of this stuff, in the future. If we can do that, I would, I'd really, really grateful. But thank you so much for today. This has been heavy. This has been deep. It takes a lot of emotion. My heart has been hurting listening to this. I've got 3 little kids that I'm so aware of, just like I said, the surface stuff, just making sure they're safe and sound here, knowing there's kids everywhere that are just fucking obliterated.
I've started to do a show now once a week on Wake Up UK.
Okay.
So on every Sunday night at 7 p.m, I do a show and I interview survivors.
Okay.
And I interview other people that I know, and we talk about it. We talk about everything what's going on, about how corrupt the system is, let alone from the perspective of a child, but all the way through life. And
they're bringing it up here, aren't they?
Is this it?
And yeah, that's it. Wake Up UK, and Alan Merritt is a host on there on a Sunday night.
How will someone get it out?
Yeah, it's on there. If you scroll down there, you'll probably find the hosts.
Well, we'll link all this in.
If you go into more, it'll show you on there.
But I'm going to have to get dashing.
It's got Alan Merritt on there.
Yeah.
Should find Alan Merritt on there.
Right, okay.
Yeah, well, I'll link all this in, Alan. And appreciate it, John. You come all the way up from London. Appreciate this. And Alan, thank you. And we'll do it again. We'll get into the next levels. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, guys, and keep on keeping on fighting the fight.
Thank you for the platform.
Yeah,
God
very
bless.
brilliant. Thank you very much
Peace,
indeed.
boys. Peace.